Thank you. And as I call this meeting of the California Strategic Growth Council to order, I just want to note that it is with deep sadness and heavy hearts that I would like to take this moment to inform you all of the death of our colleague, Cindy Montañez. Cindy was the CEO of 3 People and a fierce leader advocating for environmental and community justice across the state. She passed away on Saturday at a very young age of 49 on October 21st. My office OPR held a 5th assessment climate event last September at 3 People, and people haven't been at that place. You'd really understand not only her legacy, but the incredibly young, talented young people passionate about climate that she has cultivated over the years. So with that, I will get started. Matt, could you read the roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair Acefa. Follow your lead here. Director Acefa?
Here.
Present. Public Member Capretz?
Present.
Public Member Cardenas?
It's not on, but I'm present. How's that?
Secretary Castro Ramirez? Deputy Secretary Jameson? Jamie Hugh?
Present.
Deputy Secretary Musavi?
Present.
Deputy Director Radhakrishna?
Present.
Deputy Chief of Staff Lucero?
Present.
Deputy Secretary Schwartz?
Present.
Thank you. We have quorum.
Great. So with that, Matt, would you like to share the public comments?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to
procedures?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone joining us today, whether in person, online, or by phone through the Zoom webinar platform, or where the meeting is being live streamed on SGC's YouTube channel or Cal EPA's on SGC's YouTube channel. I'm here to provide information to guide us all through the process for this hybrid meeting, which we have designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. For those joining the webinar online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. In order to minimize the risk of background noise, you will not be able to unmute your phone yourself. For those joining online via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform does not enable video for attendees, so we will not be able to see you. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question about the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. If you're using the Zoom webinar, the best way is by using the Q&A function. Several members of the SGC team are monitoring the Zoom to facilitate public access to the council meeting, and they may remove disruptive or threatening content. If you joined by phone and have access to email, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. If you do not have access to email, you may text or call 916-634-3359. If you are here and plan to make in-person public comment, you must fill out a comment card provided at the table to my left. Please fill out the public comment card and indicate your name and the item on which you would like to comment. Then you may bring your comment card to the table with the staff and with the sign for collecting public comment cards. When the chair opens the public comment period for your item, we'll read the names of the first 3 individuals that have submitted a form for that item. Please line up by the podium when I do so in the order in which I have called your name. When it's your turn to speak, I will call your name to the podium. If you plan to make remote public comment, you must be joining the meeting via Zoom, either through your desktop or phone. To make a public comment, visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment card linked there. You'll need to complete separate forms for each item on which you wish to speak. You may complete a form at any time during the meeting. When the chair opens the public comment period for the item, we'll read the names of the online commenters who have submitted a form. When you hear your name in that list, please raise your hand. To do this online in the Zoom webinar, click the raise hand function under the participants menu at the bottom of your screen. If you're joining by phone, you can press *9. When it's your turn to speak, a member of our team will unmute your microphone. If you are online, you will see a window pop up alerting you that the host is unmuting you. You will need to click the option to approve unmute, and after that, you may begin your comment. If you are on the phone, you will hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted. Please begin your comment after you hear the recorded message. If you're unable to complete the online form but would like to make public comment, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks. Speakers requiring or using translation services are allotted 4 minutes to facilitate full participation. A timer will be screen shared. Please monitor it and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you are online or on the phone, you will be notified when your time is up. After that, we will mute your microphone. You do not need to take any additional action once we mute your microphone. Thank you for your participation, and I will hand it back to the chair.
Thanks, Matt. We'll go to item 3, which is the approval of the August 30, 2023 meeting minutes. Members need not have attended this meetings to vote on the adaptation, but may abstain. We'll have opportunity for council discussion, then public comments. Matt?
We have no public comment on this item.
Great. Are there any questions on the minutes from council members? Forwarded by Secretary Castro Ramirez. Second. Darwin.
Thank you. Director Acefa,
Yes.
Public Member Capretz.
Yes.
Public Member Cardenas,
Yes.
Secretary Castro Ramirez.
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Jameson. Jamie Hune,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Musavi,
Yes.
Deputy Director Radhakrishna,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Schwartz,
Yes.
Deputy Chief of Staff Lucero.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great. We'll move to the next item. I would like to introduce Executive Director Lynn Van Koch Libert for item number 4, which is the Executive Director's report. Following her presentation, we'll have the opportunity for council discussion and public comments. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair Acefa, and good afternoon, council members, and thank you everybody for being here with us today, both here in Barrio Logan and also who are joining us on Zoom as well. So first of all, just a giant thank you to the council for traveling here today. About a year ago, this council committed to one traveling meeting every year, and really excited that we have continued to uphold this commitment. And thank you, Council Member Capretz, for inviting us to San Diego. I think it has been a really informative, wonderful day, and I think just a testament to this council for being willing to make the extra steps to make sure that we're having these meetings in public spaces. I also want to thank the Chicano Park Museum and Cultural Center for hosting us today. We're so grateful for the partnership with this wonderful museum and cultural center, whose vision is to rectify the wrongs of systemic oppression, to empower marginalized communities, and to provide a community space for dialogue and education. Thank you, Valerie, Sina, and Fernie, for all the coordination that has gone into hosting us here today. I would also like to acknowledge that California Native American tribes and tribal communities are the original stewards of the land and the waters of what we now call California. We thank you for that stewardship and will continue to work to recognize that past and to raise tribal voices and knowledge through our work. Now, this morning, we had the absolute privilege and pleasure of visiting Barrio Logan and meeting with community leaders, residents, and partners. We took a 2.5-mile visit, which included affordable housing projects, a continuing education campus that provides services for immigrants and refugees, sustainable transportation projects, mixed-use development project, and community park. We weren't able to visit everything because I think we had so many questions and had so much to see, but really appreciated being able to see what is happening here in Barrio Logan, how we can continue to support and contribute. And I will say also some of the best tacos that I have had in a really, really long time. So we also, this morning, we of course learned how Barrio Logan's rich community culture and art are integrated among the social and physical infrastructure investments. And we're really, really privileged to visit the Chicano Park history and see the national landmark designation. While we were on the tour, there was also a workshop that was held here between the State Local Energy and Climate Coordination Group, which is a new partnership formed by Strategic Growth Council and CivicWell. And today there was a workshop that really focused on state and local coordination on housing climate equity. So thank you so much to the state partners who traveled to share and communicate tools that are available, and also to local partners who came to learn, to engage, and to continue to strengthen this joint relationship. Now, moving forward, I wanted to provide a report and share back to this council that last month, members of the leadership team for SGC and I traveled to Washington, D.C. to participate in events, build relationships with advocates and policymakers across the country, and also to connect with our federal partners. We uplifted tools and resources that SGC has developed over the past year, really to support policymakers and funders who are also working to create equitable, transformative, and accessible programs for communities, not just in California, but nationwide. We were really excited to hear that from our federal partners, there was an incredible interest in community partnerships and how those can be built into the federal programming, and that there were structures like what we've seen with the collaborative partnership structure in SGC's programs that were not only being built into existing federal programs, but where federal partners were looking for additional ways to build and strengthen those attributes into their programming. For those who have not been able to see these resources that we were showcasing, you can visit sgc.ca.gov/resources and find a number of tools that we've created over the last year to help people to share not only why, but how some of this important work can be done. Also, while we were meeting in DC with our federal partners, such as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency team, which is leading the Environmental Climate Justice Block Grant Program, which we're so excited is part of the Inflation Reduction Program, as one was modeled after SGC's Transformative Climate Communities Program. We were able to both share our learnings, but also really learn about what other opportunities are available, be able to get great insights that will then help us as we roll out our Connecting Communities initiative. That is just started. I'm pleased to report we have our vendor on board, and we'll be reaching out to communities who have participated in the Transformative Climate Communities Program any day to help start making that connection possible. Now, I'm really pleased to share, and I know my colleague will go into this in more detail, but a note around the Assembly Bill 590 HART, which the governor signed into law just 2 weeks ago. So if you'll recall that in January of 2022, the council passed a resolution that acknowledged capacity building as a key equity strategy for our state. This then subsequently launched Council Priority 2, which called for the council to proactively look for solutions to remove structural and administrative obstacles to state programming. And then last October, our whole of government approach led to this passage of AB 156, which created the Advanced Pay Pilot Program, enabling 6 grant programs to provide grantees payments in advance, which is an alternative to taking on the costs up front and being reimbursed later. So today we are so excited to share that the governor signed AB 590 because this authorizes state programs across all programs to provide up to 25% of grant funds as advance pays to nonprofits. Truly transformational. And I think both a commitment from the state to address structural challenges that prohibit organizations and communities from engaging in funded partnerships with the state. Also, I think it gives a really clear example of when we say ideate, incubate, and scale, what that can look like in action. So I'm now going to pass it to Legislative Director Will Robinson, who will provide a legislative update from this past year.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. My name is Will Robinson, and I'm the Legislative Director of the Strategic Growth Council. I would like to highlight some of the legislation and legislative interactions that have taken place during this year's session. This year, we saw the legislature take action and signal intent to act on a broad swath of policy areas that impact the work at SGC. These efforts ranged from changes to grant scoring criteria at SGC programs to environmental bond bills with specific SGC set-asides. While most of the bills that had a direct impact on SGC programs did not move forward this year, we are expecting to see many of these efforts revived next year. That being said, SGC was impacted, though not called out in multiple pieces of legislation, which also had a broader state administrative footprint. By far, however, the most significant of these was AB 590 by Assemblymember Hart. This bill granted all administering state agencies the ability to provide advanced payment to nonprofit grant recipients. As Lynn mentioned, this is a narrower version of the current Advanced Pay Pilot Program at SGC, amongst other state entities, and represents a policy idea which, while currently being tested and incubated here, is making its way into larger statewide efforts. Looking towards next year, in addition to the more broadly applicable bills which were enacted, Multiple legislative efforts this session would have directly involved the Strategic Growth Council by altering current programs or establishing new programs under the council. As mentioned, many of these are now two-year bills, which we will of course continue to monitor as we move into next year's legislative session. Some examples of these are AB 1195 by Assemblymember Calderon, which would have established a climate change preparedness, resiliency, and jobs for communities program to be administered by SGC with the goal of funding multi-benefit community level climate beneficial projects to support community and landscape resiliency. And AB 1295 by Assemblymember Friedman, which would have required SGC to create a map of projects awarded under the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. In addition to legislation, this year our office has been making a concerted effort in coordination with staff across the organization to inform and showcase with legislative offices the good work that our programs are doing throughout the state, as well as raise awareness and increase opportunities through these offices for stakeholder participation in various regions throughout California. Additionally, we are in the process of reorienting our annual report to the legislature with the goal of making it a more effective tool for them to be able to see the impacts and takeaways of our programs and to be able to draw upon clear and applicable lessons learned. And with those highlights, I'll pass it back off the way.
Thank you. I wanted to close today's executive report with just a heartfelt thank you for Secretary Castro Ramirez, who, as many of you know, will be moving on from the state after 3.5 incredible years of state leadership. She'll be joining Mayor Bass's team in Los Angeles, working on housing and homelessness, which I could think of no better person to take on such an important and challenging job. But if there's one thing that I've learned from you, Secretary, it's that passion, empathy, community-based focus, and really leading with a vision makes anything possible. I personally have had the immense privilege of working with the secretary for all these years, and I'm so grateful for everything that I've learned from you. Grateful for everything that you brought to this council, everything from passion, humor, empathy. You have been an incredible leader, and we have been so lucky to have you within the state and as a leader on this council. So wishing you just a tremendous amount of luck in your new position. Thankfully, you're not far, so this is not a goodbye, just a changing of hats. But thank you so much for your leadership, your vision, and everything that you've done for this council, for our team. And please stay in touch. We need you, but we also wish you so much luck in your next steps.
I will echo Lynn's comments as well. Secretary Lourdes, my good friend. First day I met Lourdes, we fell in love. As friends, not that kind of love, as not only as friends, but as people who share the same values around equity, housing, public service. But what is unique about her is she brings that with incredible, not only passion, but dedication to it. She could be anywhere and making a lot of money in other places, but she's dedicated her time and service to public service, which I really value. But most importantly, every single person that our colleagues from cabinet and others to rank and file, anyone who engaged with Lourdes knows that she really brings that humanity to challenging work that we do. And that is, the kind of transformation I think government and people in governments need. And you bring that. And I'm glad too that you're not going too far away. There's a lot to be done in LA. It's almost like as big as the state. I'm really happy for you that we will continue to collaborate. But thank you for everything that you've done for the state, but also for, selfishly for our council here at SGC. Thank you, Lourdes. Please.
Hey. Well, first and foremost, Cindy Montañez presente. Presente. Thank you, Chairman, for starting there. Secondly, thank you to the community of Barrio Logan Thank you for welcoming us to your home, to your community. Thank you for sharing your story, your history, the resilience that exists in this very sacred area. And thank you for reminding us, right, that it is important for us as leaders at the state level, at the local level, to continue to walk into these spaces with respect for the people, its history, and also for your dreams and aspirations. Let's not assume that we know what you desire for yourselves, for your families, and for your community. So muchas gracias. I will also, as you know, this is my last meeting, and as Lynn mentioned, to the council, to the chairman, to members of the council, to the staff of the Strategic Growth Council, and to all of our partners and stakeholders. You all have done incredible work in supporting communities to have more control over their own destinies. And I really could not pass up the opportunity to be here today because, as Lynn mentioned, I think over a year ago, the council made a commitment to get out of Sacramento and to come out and to talk to people and to see how our policies and our programs and our practices manifesting themselves in community. What more can we do? And so this is, you know, a testament to that. I also, you know, of course, want to express my gratitude to Governor Newsom and to the entire governor's administration. The dedication of this council and all of you that are gathered here in person and those that are joining us virtually, the dedication to the vision of SGC is really the centerpiece of the Newsom administration, or has been the centerpiece. And that's the vision, you know, has been about ensuring that all Californians are able to live in safe, dignified homes that they can afford, but also in healthy and thriving communities. And that, you know, of course, includes making sure that we're connecting to transportation, to economic development, to education, et cetera. So excellent work all the way around. I'm humbled that I had the opportunity to serve as Secretary of BCSH, the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. And of course, a gratitude to the governor for entrusting me to lead this agency that has 4 priorities, nothing small: housing, homelessness, civil rights, and consumer protection. Consumer protections. About 8,000 employees, 12 different entities, 40 boards and bureaus. And I will say that this agency is in very good hands and ready for the next leader to step in and step up and continue building on the momentum. Really grateful that 2 of my team members are here today. And of course, you all know our Deputy Secretary for Housing, who's been doing an excellent job, Sasha Kurgan, and Tani Macedo, who's also a member of our team. We have very talented, hardworking, smart people at agency that believe in the mission of SGC and will continue to do their best to support, not only in terms of policy making, but also of course, in terms of implementation. And just, you know, as I close, as Lynn mentioned, I will be joining Mayor Bass's administration in Los Angeles as Chief of Housing and Homelessness. And, you know, today being here in San Diego, being here in Barrio Logan is a reminder, right, of the importance of working in communities on these issues that have been entrenched for a very long period of time. I grew up in LA, in the LA area. My family immigrated to the States when I was 4 years old. And I think my passion for public service and my passion for the work that I do is, you know, recognizing the sacrifices that my family made for us, but also recognizing the sacrifices that families make every single day and wanting to do the best to create greater access, to lead with equity, to reverse the systemic racism that we know continues to exist and, leaves people out, and to carry out the vision of SGC, which is let's create healthy, thriving communities. Thank you all for what you do, and we will be in touch because I know that LA has a number of programs and projects, and I need to make sure that they're being implemented correctly. So thank you.
With that, Matt, do you need a reminder for public comments?
We have one in-person public comment on this item when we're ready for it.
After the council discussion? Great. So we'll initiate council discussion in response to the executive director's report. A couple of things that I would say is the advanced pay is so incredible to see that come to this point. And that's one of the ways that we chip away structural barriers that most of our communities, especially low-income CBOs and others face. I think that's, again, another sort of testament to SGC's commitment to equity, not just the word, but in practice. So I think that is fantastic. And another note, council members, last time we were going to schedule election chair and vice chair. We are postponing that for December 14th. SGC statute requires this council to make an election of a chair and vice chair every 2 years. So we are at that time. So we will be conducting that during the December 14th council meeting, and we'll accept nominations for the chair for both positions at that time, and then proceed to vote on the 14th on that. So any member of the council is eligible to serve in either capacity. You just have to either be nominated or nominate yourself. Now we'll transition to the executive director's reports and any comments from council members.
Oh.
It's very tough.
I'm not sure how you get it off. Well, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to San Diego and thank you so much for coming down. I had been pushing this for quite a while, and the fact that it finally happened makes me very happy. And I too want to thank the community of Barrio Logan and Chicano Museum, and everybody else who put this together, Lois and Sandig and the city. And yeah, there were so many different stakeholders involved, and this has been a wonderful experience. And I'm just really honored that kind of this dream was fulfilled, frankly. And I think Secretary Castro Ramirez you too, Chair, hit the nail on the head when you kind of acknowledge the benefit of the state officials coming down to communities and seeing them firsthand. Because you see the heartbeat of the community, you meet the people, and you can visualize it now. I think one of the biggest challenges in being on the Strategic Growth Council for me is that, well, one outcome I've already articulated, it is what it is, but that the Southern California has not received our fair share of state dollars. And in fact, San Diego County is second to only Orange County as being the last two counties to receive per capita state funds. So partly, there's multiple reasons for that. I'm not saying it's nefarious or there's any kind of bad intentions. It's just maybe a systemic problem. But one of the problems, in my opinion, is that there's such a disconnect between folks in Sacramento and the Bay Area and the folks living in Southern California. And one of those barriers is just not living there, not being here, not seeing it, not knowing the people from Southern California. And so the fact that you're here today, it just makes my heart happy. And I think it's just it's a step forward. It's progress. And I think what I'm really hearing and appreciative of is that this is just the beginning, that the state is committed to continuing to travel and get out and meet people in the community. And it's especially important that we came to Barrio Logan because, again, you can sort of see why this is, despite it all, Barrio Logan is sort of the center, that it is kind of the beating heart of San Diego. It is reflective of culture and history and where we can go, what the future is. So I'm just really pleased about everything happening today. And I want to give kudos to Sean and everybody who put on the workshop this morning, because that's what I attended. And the fact that we had state officials listening to local officials from different local governments was really powerful and I think impactful. And there was a lot of honest discussion about some of the challenges that our local governments are experiencing in managing and dealing with the state, but also ways that are already improving, as our executive director already pointed out, and that I know the state is committed to continuing to, bridge those gaps so that there is more consistent communication and connection between state and local government. And I'll just because I have a floor for just 1 second, want to highlight some of the comments that I thought were powerful because not everybody was here, was on the tour, which was just as, I'm sure, fabulous and wonderful. And I wanted to do both, but of course, had to choose. So we heard that, this is probably the most important and just resonates, I think, that the state should come down more to see and learn about San Diego. That the state applications are hard and complex and very time consuming. The deadlines are tight. And so this is coming from a planner at the city of San Diego, which is the eighth largest city in the country. It has significant resources. And yet he was saying that they're really struggling to manage state applications. So I found that I had not heard that from the city before. So I thought that was important. That more technical assistance is needed to understand complicated new codes and new programs coming out of the state. The city of San Diego and the county were kind of like, it's hard for us to pivot so fast and figure out how we have to, kind of make changes at the local level to conform to new state laws and regulations. The disconnect between Sacramento and Southern California. And then a comment that I thought was also super important. I had invited actually one of my friends, Georgette Gomez from Casa Familiar, which is a pretty large nonprofit working in the border. And she had commented that, I thought this was a brilliant line. If government is saying that applications are hard, imagine how hard it is for nonprofits. It's basically the truth. Like, right, nonprofits are very under-resourced and these applications are very overwhelming. And I will say even my organization, Climate Action Campaign, just went through a state application with the California Public Utilities Commission, and I was involved. We spent 80 hours. It's still ongoing. We are drowning in this one application for one year grant. We've had to rethink, like, is this worth it? Because of all the staff time we were devoting to this versus, spending time on things, just getting things done. It's just a balance that we have to constantly weigh. So again, I know these things take time. I'm just pointing out sort of a systemic barrier, and I know we can't fix them overnight, but I just appreciate that you all had this conversation with our local governments. And the only recommendation I have going forward is that for the next community we travel in, you have a conversation with their local governments and CBOs. Because again, having my friend Georgette, I know she's going to speak in a minute. She's already like, why do you keep name checking? But having the one CBO in the room, added a lot of value. So I think you could, if you had a room full of CBOs, you'd really hear more about what the challenges are that they're experiencing. And the reason it's so important is that obviously we have a tsunami of programs and resources coming at us. It's so fast and furious, and we're all trying to get organized and, figure out how we're going to navigate. So it's good. And we just want to elevate at the front end of all these resources. Like, how can we continue to work through some of these barriers? Because I know we all committed to it, and I know the state wants to, spread the love far and wide. So that's what I just want to say. Thank you for giving me the floor and taking up a lot of space. We are so going to miss you, Secretary Pastor Ramirez. When I think of you, I think of heart and I think of caring. You're such an obviously deeply caring person, and I admire you, and I've learned from you, and I'm going to miss you. But I know you're just moving onwards to do amazing things. So Los Angeles is very lucky to have you. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Really good feedback, especially around engaging different parts of the state. And yeah, we discussed it, we made it reality. It's also something that the governor has been asking us to do. I was yesterday on the governor's military council. We've been moving from one place to another. The fire task force, the governor's wildfire task force specifically went from region to region And it is incredible how you actually learn that you really need to get out of Sacramento because you see the unique different needs of each of the regions, which you don't when you're sitting down and crafting policy in the abstract in your office, or even, selecting communities, grant applications. It makes a huge difference. And the biggest difference, in fact, is not just looking at the projects, but hearing the people who are actually making it happen on the ground and hearing what challenges and barriers that they have. So that's really an important component of, I think, government work. We have scheduled in the next series of other engagements in November 6th. We're inviting some 80 city managers from around the state and multiple state agencies. So OPR is organizing that to hear and have that engagement. So there will be multiple agencies, including some of the members from this council, having a roundtable and discussion about the understanding their unique conditions in each of their counties. So I think that's an important component, and I really applaud this council actually leading that kind of conversation in community as well. Any other comments relevant to the executive director's report? Yes.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you, Will, for your report. Thank you, Secretary Castro Ramirez, for all of your work. Sorry, this is the first time I'm meeting you. And thank you to all the San Diego CBOs that came out today and showed us your community. I really appreciate it. I wanted to give a quick thank you on behalf of Secretary Garcia and everyone else at Cali PA, especially for AB 590 on advanced pay. As many of you know, Cali PA recently launched their EJ Action Grants, and over and over and over, we kept hearing, is it a reimbursement grant or is it advanced pay? And we're so glad that this is finally passing and we get to try it out a little bit more than we used to. So wanted to definitely just give that shout out. Thank you all.
Anybody else, Rohan?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to thank the Chicano Park Museum and Cultural Center. It's really been a tremendous day to be here, to get to know the community. So thank you for sharing your history, your struggle, your resiliency, and your beautiful art that we got to witness and enjoy. Lynn, to your executive director report and your team, thank you for taking the work of this council federally and sharing all the tools. You've delivered on the priorities and the tools, and you're sharing them. And I've heard from others across the nation about the impact of the work that we're doing. I can speak personally from Federal Health and Human Services Agency that they're very interested coming out of the pandemic in our cross-sector approach to an equitable recovery. They're looking at the 7 vital conditions framework that really takes essentially the various agencies that are represented on the Strategic Growth Council to talk about sustainability, health, and community in the future. So thanks for sharing our work. It makes us proud. Lourdes, eres un tesoro. On behalf of Dr. Galley, you have been a sister in the fight for housing as a health strategy. And so thank you so much. And we're so glad you're still here in California. And I'll end just by saying, with Assembly Bill 590 from Heart, it's tremendous and huge progress. And let's look at all the options possible to see how we could extend advanced pay also to tribes, as well as potentially local government, to keep it going. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rohan. Anyone else? Great. We will move to public comments. Matt?
Thank you. We have no virtual public comments. Oh. We have no virtual public comments for this item and one in-person public comment. We'll have in-person public comment now. Georgette Gomez, would you approach the podium?
I'm here. And I feel a little bit embarrassed now that my friend. Let's see. You don't want me to take up the mic. Yep, that works. All right, my name is Georgette Gomez and I'm with
Casa Familiar. I was also the former council president for the city of San Diego, council member, and someone that was born in Barrio Logan who now resides back in Barrio Logan. This is my community. So welcome. And thank you for being here. And we're constantly trying to remind the state that Southern California is beyond LA. So thank you for recognizing that. And I do want to invite you to San Isidro too, because there's more to San Diego. Barrio Logan is very significant, but we are a binational community and a community that needs to be seen. So next time, please, I would love to have you come to San Isidro and share what's happening over there, which is where Casa Familiar does his work. And I want to say that, you know, my comments, because I kind of, although I was invited, but I know the workshop was directed to connect with our local governments, and I kind of snuck in there. But it was good that I was there because I was able to uplift the work that nonprofits are doing and revitalizing our communities. And there's a lot to be shared. Aside from making those applications easier, please, we beg you. It is really important that, you know, we're trying to connect housing to climate and to equity, right? But there's a piece, there's actually two pieces that are missing. One is the economics of it, right? Because these communities are low-income communities, and we really need to infuse economic opportunity for the people that are here, not only just house them and not address the built environment is very critical, but economics is very critical. The other piece that I didn't share at the workshop is healthcare. And this conversation needs to be also intersected. I think that's the other piece that I would, you know, share with you all that I didn't share at the workshop. So I'm really grateful that this initiative of housing equity and climate is forcing jurisdictions to work together, is forcing nonprofits to work together at the local and at the state. And it's very critical because that's the way that we're going to be able to do the work in the ground, right? But and I know that my time is done. So last piece of, I have a lot to say around this. I've had the opportunity to work as an organizer, as a policy advocate, as a policy maker, and now I'm an implementer. So there's a lot to be said there. But I do think that at the end of the day, it really does come down to making sure that as we're uplifting and addressing housing, that we're looking at housing in a different way. There's not just about affordable housing, the way that we have had these conversations, Secretary Lourdes Castro, and thank you for everything that you do, that will continue to do. You definitely are a reflection of the heartbeat of the community. But we also need to look at housing in a different way, not just affordable housing traditionally. We need to look beyond that. And we're working on community land trusts. There's co-ops, there's other ways in which we need to take regulation to support those new ways that are not new. They're like historically, we've done co-ops in many other ways, but I think these programs are not being crafted in such way to support those alternative ways to do. So I really want to encourage you to, as you're developing guidelines, that you're thinking differently, because we got to change the system that we currently are living under. So thank you.
There are no more public comments on this item.
So we'll now move to item number 5, which is the consent calendar. The consent calendar is for routine and non-controversial business. So I'll ask Lynn to provide a brief overview of the items on the consent calendar. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair Sefo. We have just one item on today's consent calendar, and that is the approval of a new nominee for the California Agricultural Land Task Force. So the staff is recommending James Nakahara, who's a farm business advisor at Kitchen Table Advisors, to be a new task force member on this new body.
Great. Do we have public comment on this?
There's no public comment on this item.
So any questions from the council on this nominee? Any discussion? Not a motion and a second? Moved by Lourdes,
Second.
second by Darwin.
Chair Sefa,
Yes. Yes.
Public Member Capretz,
Yes.
Public Member Cardenas,
Yes.
Secretary Castro Ramirez.
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Jameson. Jamie Hume,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Musavi,
Yes.
Deputy Director Radhakrishna,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Schwartz,
Yes.
Deputy Chief of Staff Lucero.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Great. Moving on to item 6, which is an action item to approve the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program Guidelines. And I would like to invite once again Lynn and Community Assistance for Climate Equity and Analyst Nancy Chung to present the item. Then we'll have council discussion followed by public comments. Lynn?
Over to you, Nancy. Thank you, Lynn, and good afternoon, Chair Safa and esteemed council members. I'm excited to present the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program Grant Guidelines to you today. Next slide. The Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program is a new grant program that provides funding and technical assistance to California Native American tribes to build staff capacity to advance tribes' climate-related work. Administered by SGC, the goal of the pilot program is to assist tribes in developing long-term capacity to secure funding and implement tribal-led climate solutions. The pilot program will fund staff salaries and activities that include planning, securing funding for, and implementing projects related to climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Tribal grants include 2-year grants of $150,000 to $250,000, and the technical assistance provider contract will result in a TA provider team that will support tribes throughout the grant term. Next slide. The TA provider team will offer tribes no-cost, flexible capacity building support and technical assistance services that will respond to each tribe's needs. Support could include trainings and workshops, grant application and management support, partnership building, peer learning, and staff and economic development. Next slide. The pilot program's key objectives are to 1, build tribal staff capacity to advance and sustain climate action, 2, secure funding to develop and implement tribal-led climate projects, and 3, enhance peer learning relationships among tribes. Next slide. CASE program staff developed the program guidelines through robust public outreach, engagement, and research over the past year. Next slide. Tribes are eligible applicants for an increasing number of state funding programs, but many tribes do not have access to the resources needed to develop competitive applications, and many rely on consultants to apply for and manage projects. Technical assistance programs like this pilot program can support tribes in applying for and implementing state and federal climate funding while helping to build internal capacity for longer-term strategies. While tribal applicants may face many of the same barriers as other applicants, the unique status and needs of tribes require additional specific considerations in the design and implementation of technical assistance. The Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program was developed in response to consistent feedback from tribes that their sovereign status and historical relationship with the state of California necessitate a dedicated capacity building program. The pilot program will allow SGC to be responsive to these requests by helping build tribe staff capacity to advance tribal-led climate projects. In working directly with tribes, the pilot program also advances the state's commitment to build relationships with tribes in California as mandated in Executive Orders B1011 and N1519. Next slide. Considering this will be the first round of the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program, staff emphasized conducting a robust tribal outreach and engagement process to ensure this pilot program would be responsive to tribal needs. In May 2023, staff released a request for information and draft program guidelines to seek input from tribes and tribal serving organizations for a 90-day public comment period. To receive feedback on the program guidelines, staff sent 184 tribal consultation letters and over 300 tribal consultation emails to California Native American tribes listed on the Native American Heritage Commission contact list. After the letters were mailed, staff followed up with regular emails to which 2 tribes responded and held consultations with SGC leadership and staff. The consultation period was shared frequently during the public comment period and remains open for tribes. However, we know that tribes often do not have the capacity to respond to all of the consultation requests they receive and are very grateful to the tribes who made time to speak with us. Staff also conducted 19 key informant interviews and held a series of 6 workshops with 71 registrants self-identifying as a staff or member of a California Native American tribe. Through these various efforts, staff received valuable input through written public comment and verbal feedback from a variety of entities and prioritized feedback from tribes and tribal serving organizations. To conduct direct engagement with tribes, CASE program staff tabled at 5 in-person tribal events, including the Tribal Water Summit and Tribal EPA and US EPA Region 9 Conference, and presented at 2 virtual tribal events. Lastly, staff contracted with 2 tribal expert consultants, an academic and a tribal expert that SGC has a history of working with on the Tribal Government Challenge, to review the draft program guidelines and alert staff to any inherent barriers or sensitivities that may raise issues for tribes to apply to the pilot program. Paired with feedback gathered through the public comment period, this was a very fruitful process and helped staff ensure a comprehensive approach to gathering input on the draft program guidelines. Next slide. CASE program staff incorporated feedback received to update the draft program guidelines. Overall, the feedback was positive and reiterated the timely need for this program. Next slide. The majority of feedback centered on increasing the funding amount for tribes and the technical assistance provider. Staff received feedback that the original funding range was too low to adequately cover tribal staff salaries in line with program goals and are now proposing a higher grant funding range of $150,000 to $250,000 to be awarded to 46 tribes for a 2-year grant term. For the technical assistance provider contract, staff are proposing a higher budget of $500,000 to ensure the TA provider has sufficient funds to provide meaningful support that will respond to each tribe's needs. Next slide. Tribes also offered feedback about the need for greater flexibility in applicant eligibility requirements that was inclusive of the diversity of non-federally recognized tribes. In response to this feedback, staff are proposing widening the eligibility pool for non-federally recognized tribes to include those that are registered as a for-profit corporation or a limited liability company, in addition to those who are registered as a nonprofit. Next slide. Tribes also offered feedback about the need for greater flexibility in project area requirements that was inclusive of the varying degrees of tribes' land ownership or jurisdiction, and how it can be a barrier for non-federally recognized tribes to be required to conduct grant activities on lands under the ownership of the tribe. In response to this feedback and to improve accessibility of the pilot program, staff are proposing including additional eligible lands in the project area. Next slide. Lastly, staff received consistent feedback that a reimbursement method for disbursement of funds would be a significant barrier for some tribes to take advantage of this grant program. SGC has statutory authority to offer advanced payment to grantees that are registered as 501c3 nonprofit organizations in accordance with AB 590. Advanced payments can total up to 25% of the full grant award. At this time, SGC is only able to provide advanced payment to nonprofit grantees. Next slide. Following Council's adoption of the program guidelines, CASE program staff will issue a notice of funding availability and initiate a competitive application process in early November 2023. CASE program staff will also hold regular office hours and recorded workshop for prospective applicants from November to January, with applications due in February 2024. Adoption of recommended awards will be expected at the April Council meeting. Next slide. And with that, we would like to recommend the Council approve the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program Grant Guidelines. Next, following Matt's reminder on public comment, we would like to turn it over to Chair Safa. Thank you for your time.
Members of the public would like to comment on this item, please submit a public comment card at the front table. To make virtual public comment, please visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form. I will now pass it to the chair.
Great, thanks. I'll initiate council discussion. Anyone would like to comment on this? Frank? Comment or question? What comment, question, reflections on?
Thanks very much for the opportunity. Appreciate the presentation. Very appropriate that we're doing this here now. It was mentioned several times in the workshop this morning that we meet here on sacred land. I mean, historically and going back into ancient times, but also more recently sanctified 1970 with the taking over the land and what ultimately became the park and this museum. So many thanks to the people who are
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks to our hosts for having us here, and to Councilmember Capretz for compelling us to come down here and experience this. I'm sorry I missed the tour, but I want to thank the people here at the Chicano Museum who are hosting us. And I was just making a reference to the fact that we are on sacred land, and that was recognized several times here this morning, the ancient Kumai people, but also it's been more recently sanctified by the political actions of 1970. And the people of Rovario took over the land that they knew was always theirs anyways, to finally create a park, which is now a national monument. I do have a couple of questions about this program. First relating to the funding and its sustainability. This is not a 1 or 2 year. Is this a continuous funding mechanism through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund thing?
I can take that. Thank you, Councilmember Cardenas. This is a pilot program where we're using existing funding that SGC has available through a flexible technical assistance pot that we use to kind of create these pilots. The challenge ahead of us will be to identify sustained funding to continue supporting this level of direct capacity building with tribes. What we wanted to do with this pilot, though, is to create a flexible program to help us really understand the deep needs that tribes have in California around capacity building, such that future iterations of the program can be strengthened to really directly support those needs on an ongoing basis. So to quickly answer your question, no, we don't have sustained funds for the program. It's a pilot at this time.
The way it's structured, it will end by its own terms when? 2 years?
Yeah, 2-year grant term. So once the NOFA is released and awards are made in April, tribes would have 2 years to expend their grants.
And what will we do in the interim to establish a more secure, sustainable funding base?
Quite a bit in that regard. I think one of the most important components there is storytelling, and using this as an opportunity to actually lift up the work of the tribes within this program, as well as other tribes that we're engaging with throughout California in our broader suite of capacity building and technical assistance programs, to really elevate the significant need that tribes have specifically around, I think in this moment, accessing funds and implementing those funds, not just state funds, but also federal funds.
You know, much of the discussion this morning already, led largely by Councilmember Capretz, has to do with regional equity and the allocation of state dollars. And it was mentioned that, you know, Southern California, of course, extends beyond where I get to live in Los Angeles, but you know, it may seem odd for someone from LA, which gets no shortage of state dollars, to say this, but to sit here this morning and to hear the report by our own staff, so it was transparent, that it's very much appreciated. But from our own staff, the relative paucity of funds that San Diego, I think it was San Diego County specifically, has received out of the 3.1 billion in AHSC funding over the last several years. I don't think you have to live in San Diego. You do not have to live in San Diego to understand that that's just not right. And I say that coming from LA, and I'm going to hazard a guess, and I mentioned this to Nicole on the way back from lunch. I'm going to hazard a guess that our share is a little bit more probably than our proportional relationship to the state population. But having said that, there are people in the Central Valley who are saying that they're not getting their fair share. There are people in the Imperial Valley, Imperial County, who are saying the same thing. And by being able to facilitate tribes' capacity to be able to apply for grants and to be eligible for more programs, will, I think, enable us to further ensure a more equitable allocation of the return of our tax dollars to people across the state, and not just to urban centers like where I get to live, where historically we see at least our fair share.
And if I could just respond to that too, I think that is somewhat the brilliance of the council's Council Priority 2 and resolution, where the council passed a resolution committing more to build capacity of communities up and down California to access resources and implement projects with direct community benefits. But the council at the dais, when that resolution was passed, also made the very clear point that it's a two-sided coin. We also have to be removing the structural barriers within our programs such that we're not just building capacity to compete for really difficult dollars. And so the tribal capacity building program is a reflection, I think, of actually both parts of that resolution. One is our commitment to directly provide capacity building. And I should also say capacity building is sometimes seen as a paternalistic term. We actually think about it more as capacity harnessing. Tribes have been doing this work for centuries. But it is also in the program design, intentionality around removing some of the barriers. Nancy, in her great presentation, didn't get into it, but we're anticipating that this will probably be the easiest program that SGC has ever had to apply to. Simple, almost Google Forms for folks to just uplift their needs rather than putting into a lot of work into these applications or on quantifying things. So I just wanted to reflect that we fully understand the need to go beyond capacity building with a kind of two-sided approach.
Thanks very much. And Nancy, that was a terrific presentation. Not a moment too soon, because with the next action item, we are beginning to see infusion of IRA and other related climate action dollars. So
Great. Darwin, and then Richie. Sasha. Yeah, Darwin.
Can you hear me? Let's see if I can.
Very far away.
Well, hopefully folks online can hear me as well. We just wanted to commend staff for taking this on and ask a couple questions. I think Karen, you touched on a lot of what was going on through my head, which is this is both about capacity building and also about removing a lot of those structural barriers. And on our end, you know, certainly as the transportation agency, we have our fair share, both state and federal requirements and whatnot that make our processes, you know, frankly, fairly cumbersome at times for folks to be able to access our funding. We're working on that. We're doing a lot, I think, on our end, as well as, you know, the council as a whole has made this a priority as well. I think this program will hopefully do a lot to build capacity for tribes to be able to access those funds. I guess my question in terms of the looking for a sustained source of funding, from in terms of going from pilot to permanent, I feel like what a lot of times needs to be shown is some sort of measure of impact. So there's a two-sided coin there as well, that measurement of impact can also be burdensome to track, and, you know, requirements on tribes and whatnot in terms of being able to show how our investment really changed their capacity and ability to access funds and how successful they were. So I'm curious how you've been thinking about that, if we have anything in place to really measure and be able to show the results of this pilot and make the pitch for more sustained funding.
Yeah, I can answer that question. So one of the deliverables for the TA provider is to create success stories for the tribes. We'll have roughly 4 to 6 tribal grantees, and it'll be on the TA provider to create this deliverable. So not the tribes. For the tribes, if they have a climate action plan already in place, their main deliverable is simply to attend trainings and workshops and to participate in the peer learning cohort.
Great, that's great to hear, and yeah, really excited about this. And I can, you know, already tell that there's probably going to be a huge benefit to our transportation programs in particular. So.
Sasha.
Like the previous speakers, I want to thank you both for putting in so much thought to the program. Appreciate your enthusiasm and dedication. It shows in the presentation very much. So I'll try and be succinct because I think I'm riffing off of things that the public member and Darwin both shared. So I very much appreciate the flexibility and intention to be really responsive to tribal needs. And in that is the acknowledgement that tribal needs vary throughout the state. And so we heard that clearly in your presentation. And so I want to build on that and mention that I think this pilot is a great opportunity to learn from the program and then figure out ways to further address some of those varied needs. And that sets us up better for infrastructure dollars to be able to tell these stories in different, the case making that you're describing is helpful. And Karen, you and I have talked before about even for those who apply but are not awarded, those are also important stories to tell. So I want to acknowledge that part. And then here's my last bit of encouragement is that through the pilot, consider how we can reflect upon, consider how those selected grantees can allow us to reflect upon the diversity of capacity, need, and geographic representation in our state. And so, like Darwin, I'll name that there's barriers within housing programs, and we are working to rectify those and do our best. It is long work. It shouldn't take this long, but here we are. And so we can continue to be thought partners as you work on this tribal capacity grant, and feel free to call on us or any of our departments as you work through it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary Kurgan. I just wanted to offer two quick thoughts on that. One is SGC's entire portfolio of capacity building programs, kind of represented by the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team. Another two-sided coin is to externally build the capacity in communities, but internally use the reflections from that work deeply to actually influence our own programs as well as other state policies and programs. And so we are committed to uplifting lessons learned and facilitating relationships between our tribal partners and grantees with actual state folks. The idea of building a Rolodex as an immediate access to power within state government. And then the other thing, Nancy just let me know, is from all of the listening that the team has done, we are preparing to actually share out what we heard just in the listening around the development of that program, in case it's helpful for folks as you all are standing up programs within your agencies. And then finally, I think we're really excited about this idea of these kind of public profiles of folks who would come into the program, but we weren't able to provide support to. We've actually seen some success with the Regional Climate Collaboratives program in doing those, and other funders looking to and supporting elements of those programs as well. So it's an emerging best practice.
Anyone else? Rohan?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nancy and team. Really thoughtful. I serve as our Department of Public Health's tribal liaison, and we've worked with tribes around climate resilience plans, also in capacity building for preventive and early intervention work for mental health. And you incorporated a lot of key elements, from upping the funding, upping the flexibility. My question is about duration. Duration really matters. If our tagline is ideate, incubate, scale, what is the gestational period? Is it 24 months or 36 months? To hire, to retain can take a while. We learned that during COVID. There was an influx of short-term federal dollars, and oftentimes 2 years wasn't enough, especially if we're trying to tell stories and demonstrate impact and have a good off-ramp for sustainability, like Public Member Cardenas said. So I'm curious if tribes brought up the duration, even if it may mean a slightly lower amount of money, but for 3 years as opposed to 2, that may set us up better for sustainability.
Thank you for that question. During the public comment period, tribes did mention the duration of it. And I think the main focus was an increase in funding, which we were able to increase. In terms of the hiring of the staff, that is something that we've considered in the pilot program. And throughout the application process, there is a part within the narrative responses for tribes to include processes for hiring staff in a way that's efficient and that's in line with program goals. So hoping that this pilot program will demonstrate the flexibility of that and the way forward.
Great. Anyone else? Well, again, this is another example of not only addressing barriers, but also how you develop policy with an equity lens. And I specifically like the flexibility around areas, non-federally recognized tribes. And those are the kinds of things that I think this kind of pilot will fill the gap, not only for this, but again, as a pilot, that could be lessons for other programs and agencies as well. So I think that's really exciting. With that, any public comments?
We have no public comment on this item.
Do we have a motion and a second to approve the guidelines for those guidelines? When? Nicole? Second, Sasha?
Thank you. Chair Sefa? Public Member Capretz? Deputy Secretary Kurgan? Deputy Secretary Jameson? Jimmy Hume?
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Musavi?
Yes.
Deputy Director Radhakrishna,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Schwartz,
Yes.
Deputy Chief of Staff Lucero.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great. Well, item 7 is again another exciting agenda item for SGC, which is a resolution to support energy efficient factory built housing to meet the state's climate, housing, and equity goals. And I'll ask Lynn to present the item.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad you gave the title, the full title. It's a, it's a mouthful. But yes, I think as this council is very aware, we have been working on a number of initiatives over the last year to really think about how Strategic Growth Council resources and strategies can be used to bring in the unprecedented amount of federal funding that's been available through the Infrastructure Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, really with a focus on thinking about how to make that connection between these federal resources and with communities that have been historically underserved, and really all to the goal of meeting our housing, climate, energy, and equity goals. So just as a little bit of a primer, just reflecting back on Council Priority 3 resolution, which the council adopted in December of 2022. We have been looking for additional ways to really think about closing the gaps on housing, climate, and equity. And doing so at a pace that is both necessary to meeting the needs, the current, emerging, and future needs around housing and climate, but also to do so in a way that is scalable. So we have been working in partnership with Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, California Air Resources Board, and others, and really investigating and learning a lot more about factory-built housing and the opportunity that it may bring to help achieve all of these various goals. So in California, factory-built housing is designed and constructed according to the California Green Building Standards Code, or CalGreen. And it's really important to note because first of all, it is the first in the nation to have mandatory green building standards goals with goals of energy efficiency, water efficiency, conservation, material conservation, resource efficiency, and environmental quality. So when we're talking about factory built housing, it is incorporating all of those elements into the techniques. Now, what we are finding from a growing body of research that's looking at factory-built housing is that it reduces production-related emissions inherent in residential construction, particularly if they're located close to the final destination where that housing will ultimately be placed. Also, that when you're working in a factory environment, you have the opportunity for designing in a way that is highly efficient, that can embrace technologies and can use methods that can help us underscore a lot of these needs around cost, energy efficiency, waste reduction, etc. We're also seeing in the growing body of research that factory-built housing has the potential to address the barriers around the state's production and affordability goals, because when deployed well, you can see significant cost savings in the price per home using these technologies. It also can show, again, depending on the business environments and decisions that are made by the companies, incredible improvements in local workforce development and stable home-paying jobs. Now, we already are seeing factory-built housing solutions incorporated into programs such as Home Key and Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities. So we have some great examples of where these benefits are already being realized. So I love this project that we have shown on the slide here. This is San Leandro Senior Apartments, and this was built on a former parking lot. It's across from a BART station. It's 109 units of affordable housing, and using the factory-built solutions, it actually reduced construction time by 22 weeks. So if you really think about how that can extrapolate across all the state and all our goals, significant time and cost savings can be found. So despite a lot of the benefits, California only produces 5,000 units of factory-built housing annually. So that's 7% of the housing units completed in California in the last year, and less than 2% of the projected demand of over 300,000 units annually between 2023 and 2031. Also, and I think this is really important to note, that many of the units in California, such as the one that we just saw on the last slide, are manufactured in other states and then shipped to California. So when you bring all these things together, I think there is, there's an argument that there's an opportunity to really lean in on this solution to be able to meet our housing and climate goals and really accelerating manufacturing in the state of California. One of the as we've gone through and we've worked with industry partners, we've worked to understand what inhibitors there are to further development of manufacturing in the state. There are a couple things that we've noticed. One is pre-development and financial burdens are a really real consideration. So to address these barriers while meeting our goals, SGC has identified a near-term opportunity to bring in large federal investments through the Department of Energy Loan Program Office, which I'll refer to as the LPO. So through the Inflation Reduction Act, the LPO was given authority for loan and grant guarantees in excess of $400 billion. And the funding for that expires in September of 2026. So the LPO financing is traditionally and typically around $100 million per project. So that you can imagine at that scale, the cost of pre-development can be pretty subsizable. And being able to finance and put together the application to get to that $100 million can be pretty cost inhibitive for companies. So to support access to these federal funds, we are proposing to this council the development of a pilot pre-development grant program to support factory-built manufacturers to apply for the LPO financing to expand or establish new energy-efficient manufacturing facilities in California. So the pilot program would provide financial support to select manufacturers with pre-development activities to prepare for their application. Now, what this could look like in practice could be environmental assessments, community engagement, financial planning, or other activities that would be necessary to get to the federal dollars. It's important to know that SGC has just gone through a process to be designated by the Federal Department of Energy for the State Energy Financing Institution, also known as SEFI. So what this means is that the projects that receive financial support from a SEFI organization are now ourselves, the Energy Commission or iBank in California. They waive the innovation and technology requirements to reach these federal funds. So really, really important distinction that when our funds are put into play, it can increase access to those federal funds. So the pilot program is an opportunity to address the urgency of the housing, climate equity, and energy crisis while taking advantage of the near-term opportunities in the federal space. Successful applicants have the potential to bring in hundreds of millions of federal dollars into California. And through this process, SGC would work with council agencies, departments, and the Department of Energy to ensure that multiple community benefits are realized, particularly in under-resourced communities. Finally, SGC would propose sharing the findings from this pilot program to inform other pre-development efforts that are designed to leverage federal funds and accelerate energy efficient infrastructure deployment across the state. So in summary, because I know that this is a lot. Today, we're bringing a resolution to support energy efficient factory built housing to meet the state's climate, housing, and energy goals. What this resolution would ask for that it would be directing SGC staff to continue to work with the council agencies and departments to develop a pilot funding program that would first evaluate the potential for factory built housing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Second, provide funding to support California facility expansion and or establishment where the expansion would support an increased supply of housing units built in a factory setting. And finally, to support eligible projects in applying for federal assistance to build, utilize, or expand clean energy infrastructure, create jobs, and reduce emissions. So following the approval of the resolution, SGC would then work to bring guidelines back to this council for adoption in the February of 2024 council meeting. Thank you. Chair, back to you.
Great. Well, Matt, any public comments on this?
We have 7 public comments on this item.
Great. Do you want to give instructions?
If anyone would like to comment on this item, they may fill out a public comment form and drop it off at the table, or you can go to sgc.ca.gov/meetings and submit a comment form there.
So we'll start council discussion first. And first, let me say, I think this is incredibly exciting, not only because how much this technology is not being tapped into, which is mind-boggling. Only 2% of the housing production utilize factory produced housing. It's just mind-boggling in this day and age that doesn't expand further than that. And then second, I think just specifically for this time, the financing opportunities are incredible. So this leveraging the potentially hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government could really set the state in a really good competitive place there. And then third, once again, when you develop the guidelines around public benefits, labor issues and all that, I think this could be very transformational for housing production and climate and I would say cost as well, because it does significantly reduce cost. 30–40% reduction in time of construction. And there's some really great technologies that are in the incubation stages now. And to get this ahead for us, I think is really the right thing to do in the right direction to go. So I'm pretty excited about this. Anyone else from council? Yeah, Sasha.
Thank you for bringing this resolution. It's been great to kind of track what's going on with the Department of Energy. And so I want to thank the Strategic Growth Council for leading on this. And then I just wanted to share a couple more comments. I think, Lynn, you did a great job of describing a lot of the benefits. I'll probably touch on some as well. But just to mention, factory built housing is one of the strategies that's mentioned. It's actually called manufactured housing, but as Lynn mentioned, our factory built housing performs at a higher energy standard. The feds love that, but our climate goals demand that. And so we're excited to see that this process that already exists, we already have the whole mechanism for certifying factories. That's not new to us, but the opportunity to bring more of those factories to California is exciting. And I think it's also exciting because the federal interest in manufacturing and connecting that to housing ties back to Biden's White House Housing Supply Action Plan. Unfortunately, housing wasn't named as directly in all of the infrastructure packages that are included in the staff memo here. But that doesn't mean that the federal government isn't interested in making connections between infrastructure and housing. In fact, they're directing the Department of Energy, Commerce, and others to make those connections to put the White House Housing Supply Action Plan into color. And so this is one of those examples. So it's been helpful to hear from the Department of Energy. They are interested in energy projects, but they are open to having housing outcomes. And that's our language here, that we are not just talking about housing outcomes, but we're talking about environmental benefits. And we're talking about people benefits of people having steadier work, of people knowing where they are going to work. And we're excited to see some innovations that are going on within the field there. Very notable to highlight the time value of money calculation and that we can reduce costs, but also the greenhouse gas calculation and the alternative of, the housing that we're getting that is factory built, that's coming from other countries, not just other states. And that not only delayed production of the on-site component of the work when we had supply chain challenges, but also when there's not supply chain challenges and they're getting shipped, that's a tremendous distance to travel for housing, and we start losing some of those environmental benefits. So excited to see what staff do with the guidelines. And also interested to see what kind of innovations the factory may bring up. We have learned that aside from multifamily housing production, some do focus on single family, but in the times between big projects, there's opportunities to build emergency housing, some even for disaster response. And given multiple disasters hitting our state and how this affects vulnerable communities, including farm workers, we'd be excited to see a lot of different use cases for what can come off these lines. So thanks.
Thanks, Sash. I think that's a great feedback, especially sort of how flexible the guidelines could be in terms of the multiple types of housing that this could benefit. So I think that's really great comment. Anyone else? No. Great.
I do this with some trepidation because this
Please
microphone
try.
has no friends, but I think I'm its biggest enemy right now. I'm a business professor, so I kind of got to lead with what I'm comfortable in. This is for Emily Breslin, by the way. This is Keynesian economics that works. I mean, we realize that, right? This is what we're talking about. Adam Smith wrote about this in Wealth of Nations. This is nothing new. It is properly the role of government for the greater good of societal ends to identify opportunities in the private sector for the people's tax dollars to be smartly invested to generate jobs. And that's exactly what we're doing. And Sasha connected many of the dots that I wanted to connect in her brilliance, but she's right. There are so many angles and permutations to this, only one of which is that through COVID, we learned, right? Through globalization, we have imperiled ourselves through our supply chain vulnerabilities. And to be able to re-onshore more of our own building capacity for good, habitable homes for Californians, built by Californians, at good wages, with sustainable materials, so that we can have a fighting chance of coming out of this on the other side. We've got about 2.5 million homes by 2030. We have to reduce emissions by 48% by 2030. This LPO expires by its terms, what, the end of 26, something like that? We have legal authority for greenhouse gas reduction funding only through 2030, right? So we need to move now. And the opportunity to partner with partners who perhaps may not even really exist yet in the private sector. Because but for a little bit of room at the margin, they haven't entered this market yet. But this kind of extra funding capacity, smart use of our tax dollars, right, could enable more and more of these folks, maybe some of them are in the room right now, to enter into this market and do what they've been wanting to do for a long time. And that is to create jobs for Californians, to build homes for Californians that are sustainable for future Californians. This is government at work. This is the way that it ought to be. And this doesn't happen by accident. I mean, we're talking about, we're used to helping nonprofits, tribes, local governments, right, get in the queue to get their share of our tax dollar return. Here we're actually talking about helping folks in the private sector to largely be able to do the same, right? One might argue it's slightly out of our wheelhouse. But my point is that this is the type of innovative thinking that it's going to take to get us to the other side. And my ultimate point is that it's because of Lynn and innovators and leaders like her on our staff and closely associated with our staff, our partners at Milken Institute, for example, right? That this kind of idea is not just ideated, right? But it's coming to us so that we can begin it and then take it to scale. I think it's brilliant, and I think it's time we get on with it. It's just a brilliant move.
Thanks, Frank, for actually giving us professorial perspective on this, on economics 101. Only you can do, but that is a great perspective. Rohan.
I'll add some non-professorial comments. Thank you, Chair Sefa. But build on what's been said. So Secretary Galley firmly believes that housing is a health strategy and dignified employment is a health strategy. And when we dig into implementation and guidelines, let's bake in SGC's mission: healthy, sustainable, thriving communities. We're in charge of the guidelines. We can go beyond just energy efficiency. We can bake in community benefits, as has been mentioned, ensuring that these products are ready for home electrification, so we keep the gas in the ground, thermal comfort with extreme heat killing Californians and natural methods for cooling built in, access to natural light, who's got low vitamin D, and universal design for aging in place. As we look at our state's demographics, there's a lot of time horizons we need to be planning for. So we can bake in the mission of many of our agencies and the overall mission of SGC into this no-brainer opportunity, like the professor said. Thanks.
Thanks, Rohan. Jamie.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Lynn, for this succinct presentation on this wonderful resolution. I was attending the Region 9 Tribal Conference earlier this week, and there was a session solely focused on climate-ready homes for tribal elders. Climate change impacts all of us, and especially our tribal elders and tribes and a lot of our underserved communities throughout California.
extreme heat, they feel it the most. And so this is a very timely resolution to have, to not only house a lot of our folks, but also plan ahead for climate change impacts. And of course, with Cali PA and our boards and departments and offices, we focus on so many things. One of the benefits from this is obviously greenhouse gas reductions. The other is circular economy. This will prioritize infill development and everything, and it will also reduce construction waste, have more efficient use of materials. So we're super excited about that. Factory-built housing industry has been successful in California and is well proven worldwide, but has been slow to achieve scale statewide due to lack of familiarity in the industry, as well as regulatory and financing barriers. So I'm very excited that we're talking about this as a council today. So it'd be exciting to learn about how we're going to help close those financing hurdles, support regulatory change, provide education for consumers and local governments to increase product familiarity, and leverage state resources such as land and procurement practices. So thank you.
Great. Now we'll move to public comments.
Thank you, Chair. We have 6 virtual public comments on this item and 1 in-person public comment. We'll begin with in-person first. Begin by reading the name of the individual signed up to this item. Matt Horton, would you approach the podium, please?
Hi, thanks. Matt Horton, Director, Accelerator for America. I'm also a Senior Advisor with Milken Institute, but I'm speaking from an Accelerator for America perspective. I really commend this body and the leadership of staff to bring this forward. I think not just to reiterate what has already been said, the underlying principles here on how do we leverage market dynamics for social good and impact couldn't be more intertwined with what we're trying to achieve here from a state reduction of greenhouse gases, but also equity and industrialization standpoint. The money that we're seeing from the federal government, beyond the granting ability that we're seeing from federal programs of the IIJA, the IRA, the GGRF, but specifically in the LPO, this program offers us the chance to really get at the risk profile and mitigate that from a housing development standpoint. Pre-development dollars changes that calculus of lowering the investment risk of community development that we are tremendously lacking from I would say from all the way back from dissolution of redevelopment. Our inability to mobilize that capacity, not just in terms of public financing, but the people power that were embedded in our communities that could stack capital and do strategic investments. That doing this at the state level, I think really sends a huge market signal, not just that we want to build housing, but we want to incubate that manufacturing in and around our communities. So we're not just providing jobs, but providing equity in terms of ownership and economic mobility. And I'll just remind everybody the quote from the state auditor all the way back in 2021, which seems like a decade ago. But the state lost about almost $3 billion of federally available housing bonds because, quote, the lack of a comprehensive and coordinated plan that allowed the debt limit committee to mismanage and ultimately lose $2.7 billion in housing bond resources. So this is the kind of statewide strategy that helps us mobilize that statewide strategy on housing development. And I couldn't be more excited and just more kind of in congratulations of your efforts in considering this. So thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our in-person public comment. For our virtual commenters, when you hear your name, please raise your hand in Zoom. You can do this by clicking raise hand under the participants menu, which you can find at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom platform, or by pressing *9 if you're joining by phone. Our first virtual public commenter is Olivia Seidemann. Olivia, if you could raise your hand.
Yes. Thank you. My name is Olivia Seidman with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We are concerned about the lack of specificity around affordability in this resolution. The diversion of funds from AHSC would be better spent on projects that communities actually want, and communities should be given the choice between new affordable homes and manufactured homes. Additionally, we have concerns regarding where these homes will be located. Rural communities are in dire need of affordable housing, and it is unclear if these fabricated homes would be a solution for rural areas. AHSC already has a hard time funding rural projects. Rather than diverting funds to a pilot program, we recommend using these funds to support expansion of AHSC projects in rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Tyler Pullen. Tyler, are you with us?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. You may begin your comment.
Hi, my name is Tyler Pullen. I am speaking for myself and on behalf of UC Berkeley's Turner Center for Housing Innovation. We have an established and still expanding footprint researching exactly the sorts of questions around offsite and industrialized construction and how it relates to affordability and sustainability alongside other key statewide and countrywide goals. Some of this work is done in direct partnership with the state, but I think a lot of the emerging consensus, which has already been referenced, is that offsite and industrialized construction, while not a panacea, is a critical tool for addressing a lot of the longstanding issues in the construction industry and the housing industry, particularly for California. And so we are generally speaking as a collective to support this resolution and enthusiastically offer ourselves as continued co-conspirators, collaborators with the state to make sure this pilot program moves forward and is incisive and effective for as many people as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Vamsi Kumar Kotla. Vamsi, are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. You may begin your comment.
Hi, this is Vamsi Kumar Kotla, co-founder and CEO of Remo Homes, a factory-built housing provider. First of all, I congratulate SGC's leadership, especially Lynn and Sasha, for coming with such an innovative program, and also support everything that Matt Horton from Milken Institute said earlier. Again, appreciate the opportunity to speak before the Strategic Growth Council. Remo Homes wholeheartedly support the adoption of a resolution where the council coordinates with state agencies to develop a pilot funding program that supports expansion of energy efficient factories. More importantly, the council's resolution harmonizes with Remo's notification from California Energy Commission of a $3 million award for very similar programs such as advanced prefabricated zero carbon homes, and also our recent MOU with Panasonic for commercializing some of their energy efficiency equipment here in California and around the country. We concur with the research that factory-built housing in California has the potential to address the barriers to states' housing production and affordability goals while reducing emissions. We believe the proposed pilot funding program is critical to accelerate FPH industry while delivering much needed green jobs and environmental benefits in our state and towards meeting governor's goal of building 2.5 million homes by 2030. We again support the adoption of the resolution. We look forward to providing industry feedback once the council moves forward with the development of the guidelines. We also encourage additional pilot program for factory-built housing, not for reducing embodied carbon, but also operational carbon, which is net zero energy homes. Lastly, we thank Secretary Castro Ramirez for her service at BCSH. And as an LA-based company, we look forward to working with her and seeing her in Mayor Bass's team. Again, last not but the least, we hope this council meeting also happens in LA. As a working parent, it's hard to travel to Sacramento and other parts of the state, so it would be great a favor to people who are in LA who want to participate in person. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Carol Galante. Carol, are you with us?
Hello, my name is Carol Galante, and I am the Emeritus Faculty Director of the Turner Center for Housing Innovation and Chair of the Board of Turner Labs. And I am here to enthusiastically support this resolution and this pilot program, and really deep gratitude to the staff putting this effort together. I agree with all of the comments I've heard so far about how innovative and important this initiative is. When I started Turner Center about 7 years ago now, maybe 8 years ago, getting more adoption of industrialized construction was clearly a major strategy to lower costs and improve energy efficiency and create economic benefits for Californians. And so it is just very exciting to see the state take up this initiative and help companies be able to tap into those federal dollars, which is truly a one-time opportunity. So thank you very much. And thank you for all your very just wise comments that I've heard at the council meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Gabriel Grossman. Gabriel, are you with us?
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You may begin your comment.
Thank you. When it comes to addressing sustainability and reducing greenhouse emissions in factory-built housing and the broader housing market in general, particularly in the pursuit of California's carbon neutrality goal, it is crucial to recognize the carbon footprint associated with attempts to make code minimum homes carbon neutral. The manufacturing of solar panels and batteries to achieve for these homes to be carbon neutral significantly contributes to the footprint. As a solution, we should prioritize the construction of homes with exceptional air tightness, as it directly bolsters energy efficiency. This approach enables us to minimize the carbon footprint associated with achieving carbon neutral or carbon positive homes. The promotion of energy efficient construction shouldn't be confined solely to factory-built housing, but should extend to all housing types. We possess both the capabilities and responsibilities to build higher performing homes, especially in the light of the current code minimum requirements, which are very low. So we believe it's imperative that we explore means of incentivizing more on the construction of high performing buildings. And that is my comment. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Gabriel from Preflex Buildings, the founder, and thank you very much for allowing me to have a comment in this session.
Thank you, Gabriel. Our next commenter is Francisco Duenas. Francisco, are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. You may begin your comment.
Okay. Thank you so much. My name is Francisco Duenas. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Now. We're a statewide housing justice advocacy coalition. And on behalf of our coalition partners and our collective, we are generally in support of the purpose and intent of this resolution, to identify innovations that address both the climate and housing crisis. However, to buttress the comments of our colleagues at Leadership Council, we do request that the actual affordability guarantees be directly included in the resolution itself. I think that's easily done by referencing things like the RENA goals, reducing housing cost burdens. In my digital comments, I submitted that. Just in general, I think state subsidies should be equally purposeful about meeting the affordability goals and the RENA goals as we are about reducing emissions. And in the resolution write-up, it states that you all will be prioritizing manufacturing of affordable housing. And I think it makes sense to explicitly state that in the resolution as part of that crucial first step. And then just finally, we would like to caution, we disagree with the using the funding source of the AHSC, again, a program that's already significantly oversubscribed and that is producing new guaranteed affordable housing. We just feel there must be other sources of state funding to be able to move this forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Francisco. Our next commenter is Ryan Kelly Cahill. Ryan, are you with us? You may begin your comment. Ryan, are you with us? We can come back to Ryan if Ryan, we're not hearing you on our end. So we will maybe go to Matt Smith. Matt Smith, if you could raise your hand. Matt Smith also appears unavailable. Okay. Ryan, we'll give it another try. Ryan, are you with us? You are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You may begin your comment.
All right. This is actually Kevin Brown. Ryan had his name in the system here, but my name is Kevin Brown, CEO of Factory OS. We're a factory-built housing company in Northern California with over 200 union workers. We specialize in affordable and supportive housing. Over the past 6 years, we've built nearly 3,000 homes throughout the state of California, including some ASIC projects, ASIC funded projects, also including one in a rural community. So on behalf of all of us at Factory OS, we greatly support this resolution by the Strategic Growth Council and all the work that's led up to it, and believe it will dramatically help accelerate production of affordable housing, advance climate and sustainability initiatives, and increase the number of quality union jobs in our community. These are the types of initiatives that are critical to advance this industry and to further innovation. And we just want to thank you for your consideration today on this great opportunity to help address the climate and housing needs in our state. Thank you.
That concludes public comment on this item.
Great, thank you for the public for those comments. Now back to council. Is there a motion and a second to approve the resolution? That's a mouthful. To support energy efficient factory built housing to meet the state's climate, housing, and equity goals.
So moved.
Right.
Can I ask one question of Lynn?
Sure.
So just to respond to some of the comments by the equity organizations, how do you respond to some of the concerns about affordability and or, well, I would be interested in why why you're not calling it zero carbon or climate ready more than energy efficient. I didn't notice that until someone pointed it out, but I was like, wait, we are making all these will be all electric, right? That's one question.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So it's just a term of art.
Yes, and so first of all, thank you for all the comments. We really appreciate hearing that feedback. And I do think as we go through the next phase of this process, we will be doing guideline development, which will give great opportunity to be able to provide more detailed information around the details of the guidelines, the requirements, the public benefit elements, the specifics that would be incorporated into the grants. As it relates to the energy efficiency as the terminology, we're really working to design this in a way that then has a smooth glide to the Department of Energy. So in some cases, we're using their terminology as the North Star for the way that we're building this, with the intention being to ultimately get to those loan products.
Okay. Because one of the things I've noticed now in a lot of the housing programs at the state is that each of them are different and they have unique criteria, but that just makes it more confusing for developers, and it stymies like getting to the goals that the state has, because like I've pointed out before, like some of the housing programs require all electric, some don't. And the developers are like, well, what I'm used to is not just putting gas infrastructure in, so I'll just keep doing that until the state, puts down the hammer. But that's not good, frankly. So anyhow, I also really enjoyed the comment about maximizing the benefits, which I know you just commented on as well, but like the community benefits, like just thinking more broadly about how to structure the grant proposal. I thought that was a great idea too.
Absolutely. We agree. That's one of the pieces I'm really excited about is as we start to go into the guideline development is really understanding what are the priorities from this council and from the public that we can build into what the requirements are, where our piece of state funding will then really align with Department of Energy, but also South the California way. And so really focus on the things that we know this council cares about and that the stakeholders and then the public want to see as well.
Great. And maybe just, so thank you. And I'm not surprised that you're already on top of this. But maybe just reaching back out to that the Housing Justice Coalition, just to get on the same page about some, because it sounds like you already are, for the most part, on the same page.
With this particular group, I've not had any discussions,
Oh.
but I will do so.
Okay, great.
Great. So we have a motion with Frank Cardenas and second Nicole Capretz. Roll call.
Thank you. Director Acefa,
Yes.
Public Member Capretz,
Yes.
Public Member Cardenas,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Kurgan, Deputy Secretary Jameson, Jamie Hume,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Musavi,
Yes.
Deputy Director Radhakrishna,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Schwartz,
Yes.
Deputy Chief of Staff Lucero.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great. Great stuff. So we move on to item number 8, which is a discussion item on the council priority 3. So I would like to invite Lynn and Special Projects Analyst Sean Kennedy to present the item. Then we'll have a council discussion followed by public comments. Lynn, Sean.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. It's my pleasure to introduce a panel discussion on planning and coordination for housing and climate equity goals in the San Diego region. Next slide, please. So this panel discussion stems from SGC's resolution on housing, climate and equity, which we've heard a lot about already today, which aims to leverage existing state resources at the housing climate nexus through improved interagency alignment and coordination with local and regional partners. Since the introduction of Priority 3, the work plan in April of this year, SGC and partner agencies have made considerable progress, including the completion of an inventory of state housing, climate and equity policies and programs, the first implementation workshop with local and regional partners, which we hosted in this room this morning, and the co-production of a general audience video highlighting the benefits of infill development, which has had over 250,000 views since it was released a couple of months ago. It's no Taylor Swift, but it's pretty good. So central to the work of Priority 3 is understanding how local and regional implementers engage with state policies and programs, which can then inform council actions to improve access to resources and reduce barriers on local and regional agencies. The panel is intended as an opportunity for local and regional implementers to share their perspectives on these issues, including successful strategies for accessing and deploying state opportunities. So with that, I'll turn to our moderator, Tuere Faola, the Sustainable Communities Program Manager at SANDAG, to facilitate the discussion.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm going to try and get this off since I think we're all going to be sharing this one. So we'll hopefully have better success than earlier. Okay, wonderful. Well, again, good afternoon. My name is Tuere Faola, and I work at San Diego Association of Governments, managing our Sustainable Communities Program, and I'm really happy to be here with this panel. I've had a wonderful opportunity to work with each and every one of them, and so I'm really excited to talk about and to hear them talk about regional collaboration when it comes to climate, housing, and equity. And it's been really great hearing all of the discussions around funding. I think that's something that all of us have in common in trying to pursue funding and the discussions around the challenges challenges with doing that. So and the other thing that you just mentioned, Sean, about the barriers and what we face when we're trying to work together and really advance some of the goals that are not only our regional goals, but how they do align with a lot of our state goals. So I'd like to just jump right in and want to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from all of our panelists here. And so maybe thinking that we could start with Darby for the first question here. And since we did start talking about funding, maybe we could start off with the funding question. And, you know, Darby has works with our regional climate collaborative. And, you know, a lot of times when we think about successful proposals and when we're talking about some of the things that we even mentioned and heard in the earlier presentations, we only learn of those funding opportunities when the project was awarded. And we know that the process that it takes to go through actually getting those projects funded and making it successful is quite a lot of work. And it's a really extensive team that comes together and does that. You've done that with us as SANDAG, and I'm sure with many other entities. And so I know how hard it is, and I know you personally know how hard it is to work on those things. So love to hear some of your insights into what's required at the regional scale to access some of that state funding opportunities. But also when you win that, how are you making sure that those projects are getting to completion and are finished? Because it's not just as easy as making a schedule and saying, I have that end date. So love to hear from you on that.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. Again, as Tori said, my name is Darby Berry. My pronouns are she, her. I serve as the director of the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative, and so have the privilege of working with over 90% of the cities and public agencies and special districts in the San Diego region on climate action broadly. And so we support our partners both on mitigation and adaptation and resilience holistically. We conducted a adaptation needs assessment in partnership with SANDAG back in 2020 to really establish this kind of framework for what it is for us to accelerate resilience action. And the biggest thing that came out of that was the need for not just funding to get projects off the ground, but full life cycle funding to take projects from planning into implementation. And so some of the challenges that our cities and public agencies have is this process of piecemealing together grants and grant timelines in order to accelerate projects from a plan to implementation. And sometimes some of the challenges that coincide with that is we have these long gaps in between where we're waiting to get a new funding source, or we're trying really hard not to accidentally double dip by applying to too many funding sources that we can't actually manage. And, you know, as it was mentioned before by many folks in this meeting, the process to apply for funding itself is strenuous. It is a large lift. I know some of our state agencies in the past couple of years have been working on different ways to streamline applications. But, you know, as we're seeing both this kind of, I think tsunami was the word Nicole used earlier, and I really like that. I usually say fire hose, but waterfall of funding opportunities, which is incredibly exciting. We still have the same capacity gaps that we had prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly with our climate action and climate resilience. And so bridging some of those capacity issues for funding is critical. So we're seeing those challenges a lot with our cities and public agencies. And then the last thing I'll mention is some of the conversations we've been having with our partners is it's not just about applying for the grant, but it's also the capacity to manage the grant. And so it does take a lot of work to be able to manage that funding. And so we're seeing a lot of conversations at the state right now where the intention is to pull in more nonprofits into these projects and conversations, but really excited about the advanced pay. But if the lead applicant is a city or public agency, are we still solving for that problem of those nonprofits being partners on those grants? And are they able to receive advanced pay? I'd love to see some of those questions and conversations happen because if you are a nonprofit organization asking to be step up, we just did a study in San Diego on the 300 environmental nonprofits in our region, which sounds like a lot, but there are 12,000 nonprofits in our region. So it's only 2% of that 2% of our nonprofits that identify as environment or climate nonprofits. They have an annual budget of less than $250,000. So if we're asking these organizations to step up to the plate to work closely in partnership with our public agencies on these challenging grants, if the grant itself is more than 3 times their annual budget, how are they going to be able to step up and sustainably bring on new staff or pay those staff members who are there and manage those grants in a reimbursement model? So I think those are some of the challenges we're seeing that I'd love to elevate today.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful and insightful. And I think that what Darby is sharing here is something that as a regional planning agency, we have also heard. We do pay our community-based organizations to do a lot of outreach and work for us. But one of the challenges we have been hearing lately is in the big tsunami or fire hose of funding is it's a tsunami and fire hose, but eventually you're turning the faucet off. And they have some concerns about really growing what is a nonprofit organization without that steady stream of income. And so we're running into challenges as to how we really utilize that at the regional scale. So certainly I appreciate those comments, especially around the capacity building and the work that you were able to do with us. So I'd like to maybe turn to Shasta, and it seems like you might have actually been at some of the same conference as I think one of our council members was earlier this morning for the tribal EPA. But you know, I know we've worked with you and you hold many, many hats. Sometimes I wonder how you're actually able to do all it is that you do. But Paula is the director of environmental department at the Paula Mission. Shasta, I'm sorry, is the director of the environmental department at the Paula Band of Mission Indians. However, she also holds several other considerable titles and work and experience that you're bringing to the table, from supporting environmental protection and historic preservation, but you're also the chair of the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, as well as the director of the Tribal Climate Health Project. So I think you really bring a unique perspective representing the tribes. A lot of that conversation was had here today. And so we'd really love to be able to hear your perspective representing the tribal nations. And then for those who maybe are not familiar, San Diego County is home to 18 tribal nations. And so we are have the most in any one singular county in the United States. And so it's a really unique opportunity. I'm really glad to have Shasta here on this panel with us. But how do the different areas that you focus on around environmental protection and historic preservation intersect with efforts to support what that state is trying to do with its housing, climate, and equity goals? And then if you also don't mind touching on what pathways do you see for us to be able to better align our priorities, especially those that potentially might conflict?
How much time do I have? Thank you for the kind introduction and for the invitation to be here. And yes, I spent the last 3 days up on the Viejas Reservation at the Region 9 Tribal EPA Conference. And glad to hear that you were there as well. I wasn't in the session that you were in. I was giving my own session at the same time on data sovereignty and tribes. But in my role, let me back up a second. I'm not Indigenous. I think it's important for people to know that. My ancestors are from Northern Europe and Eastern Europe. And for some reason, Paula has trusted me for almost 19 years to do the work that I am doing. And there are a lot of things that I interact with that are important for Paula as a distinct tribal nation, but that are also relevant to other tribes, not just in California, but nationwide. And so that's why I have expanded some of my work to include being able to advocate for and talk about the things that are shared issues with many, many tribes. I can only speak for the tribe that I work for, and I'm not here with my tribal council's permission to represent them, but I want to give you my perspective on the work that I've done for all these years to assist tribes with their environmental and their cultural preservation issues. And that's really where the intersection comes. Now, for a lot of people, they find it interesting that I'm able to do both the environmental director work and the tribal historic preservation officer role, but I tell them they are one and the same. There is no environmental protection that does not also involve cultural resource protection. And because for tribes, the land and the people are one. So if you're doing environmental protection, you're doing cultural resource protection. And I've actually been yelled at frequently by a tribal elder for even calling them cultural resources. They're not cultural resources. They're our lives, our hearts, our sacred beliefs and places. So I say resources because that's what the laws call them. And that's the language that we have to speak when we're talking to government agencies. When it comes to the issues you all are speaking about today, when it comes to climate and housing, the thing that always comes to my mind is at what expense to the tribes, because the land that you are on is tribal land, no matter where you go. And it doesn't have to be sacred. It just is, any more than a liquor store down the street from a church is not sacred, but it's still on a city's land. No matter where you go, you're on tribal land. It doesn't have to be sacred. It just is. And so this is Kumeyaay territory that we're on today. I work in Payomkawachum territory for people who are Kupangawachum people from what is now called Warner Springs. So when I get a request for consultation for new housing developments that are going in, my responsibility is to find out, are there sacred sites nearby? Are there cultural sites that might be affected by this project? And one of the biggest challenges we have is that a cultural site is not necessarily something you can see or touch. It's something often intangible because it's part of a site where part of the creation story took place. And I can give you that's just one example, but a specific example, a housing project on the intersection of Interstate 15 and Highway 76, it's called Horse Creek Ridge, was built on top of a tribal cemetery. When the first grading was being done for the road to go into that development, intact burials were found, not just intact cremations, but intact skeletons in a flexed fetal position, meaning that they were thousands of years old. And when that happened, we had to have these conversations with the permitting agencies to say, we don't want you to be putting this road over this cemetery. And guess what? There's a road there today. So we lost that fight as tribes to protect that sacred site, sacred to the Payomkawachum Luiseno people. And that's always what I'm thinking is, how can we manage to do both of these things? We need housing. I live in a 104-year-old house in Escondido that is allegedly now worth $700,000, and it's basically being held together with termite spit. So I'm not really sure, what we're supposed to do when it comes to lowering the cost of housing. And I love hearing what we're hearing today. But in my TIPO mind, that's what we're called in short for THPO, is what sacred sites, what cultural sites, what areas that are important to tribes are potentially going to be impacted, and what are the agencies and the permitting requirements going to do to mitigate those impacts. Tribes are not against housing. Tribes are certainly not against mitigating the effects of climate change, but tribes want to see it done in a way that is taking account of what might be lost every time a lot is graded or a trench is dug for utilities, that there might be something there that with just a little bit of time and effort spent working with tribes, you can avoid and come up with mitigating measures so that you can have your houses and you can have your tribal sacred site or not so sacred site, a tribal kitchen. My friends at Pachanga call them kitchens, the grinding rocks where you see the little bowls where the acorns have been ground. Those are kitchens. That's where people made food for their families. And they're just as important as the sacred sites. So we can do this. We can work together. Tribes want to see these things move forward, but we can't see it being done on the backs of the tribes the way settlement has been done since 1492 and in California, 1769, when Father Sarah arrived. I could say more, but I know Murtaza has a question waiting for him, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Shasta. That was very good. I was really shocked by what you were saying earlier when you said environmental protection and cultural resources. They're one, and that it's the language that we use to try and explain what is really, you said, it's the lives and the hearts and the beliefs and the places. And I think it's important when we're talking about tribal nations and we're talking about the people and the things that you just said there. And that, it's not that they're against housing. It's not that they don't want to see this development built. And I know at least in the San Diego County region in our tribal nations, many of them are still trying to even have more housing built on the reservation. And there's not enough housing to house all of their tribal members who would like to live on the reservation. So often thinking about what you just shared and thinking about, what we call it in the academia and in our space of professionalism and just saying it's environmental protections and it's cultural resources, not having the sensitivities that maybe this all is their land, and we need to be very considerate because what we're calling cultural resources is their hearts and it's their lives and it's their places, and whether they're living on what we've designated with a line on the map as a tribal reservation or they're living off of that, outside of the boundaries of that line, it all is still their lives, their hearts, and their places and their beliefs. And so I really appreciate the things that you shared with us. So we're going to go to rounding out with my colleague here at the County of San Diego, Murtaza, he is going to talk and I think really be able to round out, from a public agency perspective, working from more of a regional collaboration, as well being the County of San Diego. And so you also have a lot of experience and information and just being working in affordable housing. We had a lot of discussions about that today, economic development, some desires to, see redevelopment. I know come back as something I always hear when we talk about housing conversations and just really civic engagement. And so love to hear your thoughts on how you think about what is the role of civic engagement and fostering collaboration, especially when we're talking about housing, climate, and equity, and really making sure that these things happen and we're not just talking about it only.
Thank you, Trey. So my name is Murtaza Baksamosa. I'm with the County of San Diego. I'm the program manager for regional sustainability. I joined the county a little over 2 years ago with about 2 decades of work in community benefits coalition building, and coming here at the county really inspired by the organizational change in terms of how community engagement is at the core of everything we do, and in terms of partnership with the community defines our operations. In the process, over the last 2 years, we've received several initiatives and directions from our board of supervisors. And I won't be able to go into many of them. Maybe I'll give a couple of examples from a local government perspective, how we can take regional leadership, regional initiative on issues such as housing, climate, equity that are often global in nature, and we are oftentimes constrained by our authority and resources. And in doing so, how do we kind of bridge that? How do we leverage it and work with others? Before I kind of get into examples, I just want to give a shout out to the Strategic Growth Council staff, the team that you have. In the last 2 years that I've been there, very responsive, very supportive, provided us with technical assistance, both organizationally as well as programmatically. Given the innovation, especially given the innovation that my board expects of us and staff, and the advancements that are being made across the state and how we deal with these issues, it is oftentimes very valuable to have that kind of a central repository, and including with the OPR, to have that technical expertise on here's where the state of knowledge is even in areas such as community engagement. So I want to kind of appreciate that the guidelines that you put out, they're very instructive. And some of us working on the ground in trying to put together these kind of working groups are looking at those guidelines in terms of our roadmap. In fact, we did put out an EJ roadmap. Others might have too, and we did look at that. So I want to give the shout out to the staff, the work you've done. Of course, I want to also give a shout out to my San Diegan council member Capretz for gently reminding us as a local government agency. We always appreciate that support from the community, but also reminding us about what our goal and our direction is, and being that voice that can sometimes tell us we need to do better. So I think that community partnerships with trust are critical in success of regional partnerships. So with that kind of I'll just give one example and turn back to you so that I don't take too much time, but I'm here if there's specific examples on each of these initiatives, because the number of board initiatives that we have received are quite voluminous, and we are trying to understand and what else everybody else across the state is doing so that we don't reinvent the wheel. But here's one example of what we did in San Diego. And that was, it was initially a board initiative from January of 2021, which was basically to develop a regional sustainability plan that includes regional collaboration across partners, including other local jurisdictions, multi-jurisdictional agencies such as SANDAG and Air Pollution Control District, tribes, labor, business, and community-based organizations. It was quite an ambitious goal from our county, which does not obviously have jurisdiction over all its land. But I must say that we have a unique setup in our region. We are a one-county region. Therefore, no matter where you are in our county, you are served, or in our region, you are served by our county. And no matter where you live, whichever city you live in, no matter who your elected officials are, you still are represented by our Board of Supervisors. So therefore, our board speaks on behalf of every single person in this region. So when they tell us to work with other cities, they are telling us to work within the umbrella of their own jurisdictional reach in terms of the power. Therefore, what that meant is that we can work together across different climate action plans to look at how our emissions reductions measures kind of can weave in these efficiencies and build up to something that's bigger than just our own authority. And with that, before I turn it to Tuere, I want to acknowledge that that analysis in conjunction with community, business, labor, and other jurisdictions, that analysis is done, but it's building up to a place where we can actually attract federal funds, such as the climate pollution reduction grants, in the tables with SANDAG and other agencies. So that's just one example, but I think that successful collaboration built up on community engagement in terms of our leadership with a municipal governments working together can be a successful case study for federal and state funds.
Thank you, Martha. So I think we'd like to just do one last question, and we're going to kind of call this one a little bit of a lightning round. So I'll ask that all of our comments are pretty brief, but I think you set us up really nicely in talking about partnerships. We talked a lot about funding, and one of the things is that I think in the SANDAG region, the San Diego County region, we really want to make sure that our funding is translating into meaningful investments and can translate into things that are able to be implemented. So my question for each of our panelists, and you can take this in any order, whoever might want to go first, what is your perspective of participating or taking advantage of the Climate Readiness Roundtable? This is something that we're starting as a collaboration effort here in the SANDAG region, that we're wanting to have full of diverse participants, not just county SANDAG, but really a diverse set of participants to fund and implement integrated housing and climate projects. So thoughts on participating and taking advantage of that?
Yeah, I think, for the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative, we've been kind of informally holding this role for a long time, and we really want to support our local entities to take up that leadership. I think at the end of the day, though, we also need to continue to support the staff members who are carrying a lot of this work forward and carrying these projects beyond elected official timelines. And so making sure that these really long-term projects maintain vision and strength and support across the finish line. So excited about having, more leadership and support, and think it's incredible for SANDAG to take up this, especially in the PCAP process. We've been excited to be a partner in the process. And so, San Diego is ready, we're prepared, and we have been a leader in climate action and intersectional work for the last more than a decade. And so really hopeful that the state will continue to see that and help us out.
This is a little more difficult for tribes just because of the sovereign state of tribal nations, and that's a sovereignty that's no, don't get me started on my sovereignty lecture, but basically it comes from the federal government. It's that ward guardian relationship, but nonetheless, tribes have sovereignty. And so we are not really technically a part of San Diego County. So when you talk about being, represented by a board of supervisors, Palo is within District 5, but we don't have any real authority or ability to do that much that relates to our tribal lands that has to do with our supervisor. But nonetheless, we work hand in hand with SANDAG on a lot of different initiatives, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that. primarily for my role, we talk about transportation, and there's our Caltrans guy. No. It's fine. I'm going to be on a cultural resource committee meeting with Caltrans at the state tomorrow. So it says transportation. It's like garlic with a vampire, but we do the best we can to manage that relationship. And it's the same with Sandag. There are places where we don't get along. It's just the reality, but it's really helpful that local governments want to work with the tribes, because in the past, within my time, we were just kind of blank spots on the map, here be dragons kind of stuff. And that's not the way we should be working, because climate and housing needs transcend boundaries, right? So what we're doing with climate change work, we're trying to work with Sandag to do that too. And we have our own CPRG grant that Paula is the lead applicant or the lead grantee on that. And our partners are Viejas, Hamul, and La Posta. But we want to work with Sandag as well, because it makes no sense for us to be doing it separately. So I really do look forward to those opportunities to continue those and growing and improving those working partnerships. And then last thing, I should have said this first. Thank you, Strategic Growth Council. We are also a regional climate collaborative recipient and are working with 25 partner tribes through the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association to get some things done. So thank you.
Shasta, I do want to continue on that, and thank you to Strategic Growth Council. We are also the recipients for our planning grant in Spring Valley, the first probably in the unincorporated communities in the state. And that's kind of like where I wanted to get to. That the good news is that these incentives are there with the climate pollution reduction grant, the IRA, the bill. This is a historic opportunity for us to get together, and there's a reason to celebrate, but it's just the money is not gonna last long and not gonna make lasting change unless we build that enduring capacity. And these coalitions that we put together now need to be enduring. So that example, right, we had 200 people show up from the community in that inaugural event for the grant. Now we need to build up on it. We need to give that implementation. We need to actually create that kind of institutional structure for lasting change.
Great, thank you all. So now, following Matt's reminder on public comment, we'll turn it over to Chair Asafa to continue this discussion. The council may ask additional questions to the panelists to share their own reflections on the discussion. So we'll start.
We will start a council discussion on this. I thought it was pretty informative in terms of the three perspectives actually sort of complement each other, and obviously the tribal. And I also learned something new about termite spit as a housing glue, maybe for the housing manufacturers to take notes on that. But I want to get back to what you said around sort of one of the barriers or challenges being piecemeal grants that is out there. What solutions do you think? I mean, I can't think of any other, because the structure that we have within the Keynesian economy or the market economy is those kinds of projects have to be funded through multiple, the application process is a whole other issue, but the nature of that, I don't see how that can change.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges that we're hearing is just having the technical capacity to understand what the requirements of taking something from, planning from 30% design and engineering into implementation, especially when we're piecing together particularly state dollars and federal dollars. So one example I'll give is when we have a few projects in the region who are really ripe for great adaptation and resilience work, and have secured BRIC funding. So from the federal government and FEMA dollars. So the Building Resilience in Communities is a great preventative representative grant. But it needs a cost share match. And so then our cities are held up on these kinds of where they've been able to secure the large federal dollars to do implementation, but they're having a hold up with trying to get that cost share match. The original planning dollars for this project were funded by state dollars. And so I think some of the state partnership to kind of help move these catalytic projects along is in helping with those match shares or the technical assistance needed to apply for federal dollars. And so I think it's making sure that there is this pathway for providing that direct assistance and direct report and direct support, because we can't always rely on consultants to step into that role. I do think if we want to think about the idea of the public good and public service, then the state and other agencies really need to step into those kinds of technical leadership roles would be really helpful.
Thanks. That's really good feedback for our state agencies. Sasha.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much for being here and being candid about successes, and could ask a bunch of questions. I'm going to keep going on funding for a bit. I am curious about, well, I'll reflect on something that the federal government is trying to do. And they've mentioned, loans. I work on housing, so I'm going to center that. But loans that can cover pre-development through construction in one loan. And we're like, yes, show us what this looks like. Tell me how that can happen. And we're ready to meet you. We have all the pipeline. So I wondered, could that be helpful? One. Second, for pre-development funding where a permanent source will come in and kind of take out pre-development or construction loans, could revolving loan funds be helpful? And has that been discussed with any of your leadership? And then I really like what you just said, Darby, about the technical capacity and not to take out consultants, but just for clarity of and for sharing expertise on something instead of expecting that everybody figure it out on their own. Really appreciate that comment. And I think we can probably all reflect on ways that we can wayfind within our own programs to clarify which can weave together better. But thank you for your comments already. So if any of those funding sources that I mentioned would be helpful, I'd be very interested.
So if you don't
Please go
mind,
ahead.
I would love to chime in on that one. I actually run our housing program at SANDAG as well. And since we're doing all the thank you so much for the regional early action planning grant funds as well. But yes and yes, short answer to both of your questions. But when we were doing a lot of our outreach related to how we needed to structure using the 43 million that was formula funded to the SANDAG region through REAP, one of the things that we talk to developers about is how would they like us to use the funds, right? There's a limit as to what government can do to force a developer to build, and pre-development costs were a huge concern. And they talked about the limitations that put on them to be able to not necessarily get a project over the finish line. And then the other thing that they mentioned, particularly some of those who are focused that are nonprofits and are focused on affordable housing, is they did mention the revolving loan, because we talked about setting up a portion of our REAP funding as just grants to help support some of the pre-development costs to get the projects over the finish line. And they came back and said, can you diversify what you make this fund into with grants and revolving loans? Because we're not in this for profit. So we would like to come back and borrow off of it at lower interest rates and keep having a source of funding to continue to build in the region. So I would say for the SANDAG region, yes and yes.
Anyone else? Virginia.
Okay. I think this is a question for you, Murtaza. I'm wondering, you made a comment about the limited term funding that we have coming down, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot. Like we're kind of in a little bit of an economic downturn at the state level, and we have had a tremendous amount of our own funds, and now those are dwindling, and we're seeing this huge inflection of federal money. And so how do you think about long-term capacity building given fluctuating funds? Is it about educating your own staff to make sure that they have the tools and knowledge about how to move forward, or is it something else?
So there's two pieces. One is the capital, and then there's the maintenance and operation, generally speaking, in terms of the facilities. If it's capital, and we do have a public-private sector partnership. That's one component. We're like for the county, and the region, we're still grappling with how do we fix the Tijuana River Valley giant, and even now, with almost a $300 million request, there's still $1 billion short, at least, for what we're trying to do. But so capital, there is a need, and if we make a concerted effort and we get those funds locked in upfront, we can deal with it. In terms of maintenance and operations for a municipality, it's a question of revenues and how do we pay for what charge we have. So for in terms of our if you will, in terms of like the opportunities that are coming down, that does kind of create question. How do we are not in the business of, for example, running housing. And so how do we kind of partner with the private sector or nonprofit sector to be able to sustain it?
Great. We'll now move to, Sean, did you have something to say? No. Move to public comments now.
Thank you. We have no public comment on this item.
Great. Well, thank you, all of you. That was really, really informative. Great discussion. Let me jump back. Just remind my council members we're about 14 minutes behind. I know some have flights to take, just as a reminder. Not too bad, but 14 minutes. We will move to item 9, which is a discussion item on the 2024 SGC Catalyst Conference, and Lynn and Matt Horton. Matt from the Milken Institute, please.
Thank you, Chair. So council members, we are just really excited to just continue this conversation and this engagement with you as we go through the process of building out and really thinking through what the 2024 Catalyst Conference is going to entail. So just as a reminder, you know, we met in February 1st and 2nd of last year, really focusing on centering community priorities and working to think through investment. So this year we are taking a kind of a step forward. The conference is designed to be themed as progress in place, from power building to project implementation. And it's really building on the work that we had from last year, really focusing on taking that step from capacity and readiness in underserved communities and thinking about then the next step around implementation. So we're really taking a lead from the governor in this sense, in terms of really focusing on the call to implementation, given just the tremendous amount of funding opportunity, but also just the timing where we're at. So progress in place is really thinking about not just what's happening at the state level, where we have the strike force, the strike team that's working on big implementation questions and challenges, but really anticipating challenges that are associated with project development and implementation at the community level. So knowing that while we have large projects that will be moving forward in all different places, that there's really specific and important space that we need to also be thinking about anticipating as it relates to localized community-based projects as well. So we are designing this year's conference with a focus for an audience of cross-silo practitioners. So folks who are really facing the urgency of bringing projects to fruition, who are working with short deadlines, but who also are, in the position to help share, educate, and inform on what are kind of the key benefits that we really want to be institutionalizing as a state as we go through this large round of public investment coming from the state and the federal governments. So kind of thinking about that, we have designed the conference with 2 days, the first day being really focused on the tactical strategies. So thinking about project sponsors and Think about what they're going through right now and what information, solutions, ideas, conversations we can be bringing forward that are going to help individuals facing these challenges or showcasing solutions right now. And then on day 2, we really don't want to lose sight of how the way that we are programming funding right now, both within the state and at the federal government through Justice 40, with a focus on holistic, multi-benefit, equity led, community-driven projects, that this is newer and a lot of this work is not institutionalized. So what are the things that we can be doing now as a state and as a council to be thinking about setting an agenda around understanding what's working and using the next 10 years to really be thinking about institutionalizing, so we don't get to the end of Justice 40 funding and go back to funding as we have in previous decades. So just following the conference, we'll follow the same model that we did last year in terms of releasing summary papers that share opportunities, obstacles, best practices, and example solutions that come from the participants in the workshops. But really, we wanted to highlight, and this is, I'm so grateful to have Matt here, the Milken Institute. We want to focus that we're increasingly seeing this convening is not just being about a day or 2 days, but really about the work that goes into coming through to the agendas, the work, the projects up into the conference, having the conference be kind of a point in time where we work really diligently and concertedly on these ideas, but then that it carries forward and that this is kind of an ongoing convening collaborative effort of partners that are working all across the spectrum to advance community infrastructure projects. And so as we've gone through this process in partnership with the Milken Institute, wanted to have a really exciting initiative that Milken has been working on and has up and running, introduced to the council today. And this is called the 10,000 Communities Initiative, which was created as a direct response from last year's conference and hearing really clearly what folks needed and what was missing. And so I want to turn it over to Matt so he can talk about what this looks like, how it's being used, what it can mean for all of your respective agencies and departments as well. So over to you, Matt.
Lynn, thanks so much. And thanks to the council again for their support of the Climate Catalyst Conference and its ongoing efforts to, really deploy and wrap a strategy around this moment of pulling down federal funds and attach it to all the things that we want to see done that increase resiliency and economic mobility around the state. Before I get to the California version of the community infrastructure and the 10,000 Communities Initiative, this is really, as Lynn said, emblematic of kind of the ongoing efforts of the Climate Catalyst Conference to continue its efforts beyond the conference to inventory and provide a platform to engage with the community around their priorities and really to create project pipelines and add in that missing capacity gap that we've heard so much about today and constantly about what are those pieces missing from like a data infrastructure standpoint, and how do we provide that tool to local communities and with a wink to kind of that systemic element that may be missing in terms of capacity and technical assistance and moving forward. I'm going to run through these two, Sam, quickly because I'm going to catch a train at 5 by hell or high water. So next slide, please. And what we're seeing here is, what's the problem? And I think you guys are all very well attuned to this from the organizing principles of the Climate Catalyst Conference about, how do we unlock this funding? How do we get past, if we were all startups, we'd be calling it the hill of death in terms of that funding gap with precious dollars coming down. But how do we align that with like shovel readiness? I really don't like that term, but lack of a better term of, how do we get ourselves ready to harness this funding around things that we want to see implemented and built? So leveraging dollars, creating project pipelines, adding community resources around engagement. So really ground up. Next slide. The solution really around this project pipeline, but how do we get there is, this inventorying exercise. How do we engage with the city? I think what we really need is a PR campaign here and get on like everything from AM radio to, public access to say, do you have a project? Do you need help? But I mean, that's what the Community Infrastructure Center is really, hoping to achieve. Do you know the pre-development around? Do you know what you have? How do we get that in a state of impact and deployment? beyond just the, feast or famine around grant writing opportunities. Next slide, please. So like I said, the technical assistance platform is born out of this effort, working across the country, really under the leadership of my colleagues at Milken. Special thanks to Dan Carroll and Rachel Halfaker, who are really leading this on a national level. Next slide. Some of our communities of purpose here and partners. I think, especially in that institutional side here, unlocking some of that from a state dollar standpoint really jumps out at me. But how do we engineer more place-based wealth? How more place-based investment? That's really what's driving a lot of this work. Next slide. Again, just the regional approach here that we're all working under. SGC has been very well engaged, I think, in the national efforts beyond just what's going on in California, and really providing that best practice on programs that have gotten us this far in terms of transformative climate communities and affordable housing, sustainable communities, is really providing a national model of doing some of the early work that's obviously informed a lot of what's happening at the federal level now. Next slide, please. The next few slides here really just show the infrastructure and the steps that we'll have to go to build out that systemic model around how do you build a project, how do we get to a state of pre-development readiness, how do we then engage in with grant writers and stuff like that. That's next slide. Again, that capacity element, especially here at the city level, once we get to that sense of what's this going to cost us from just a people power standpoint. Next slide. The data needs, those missing data needs. This is even before we get to like our ability to write a grant. Next slide. Yeah. But the whole kind of spectrum here is what the Community Infrastructure Center is supposed to walk us through and really help as that like checkbox framework of project readiness. Next slide. Again, the Community Infrastructure Center is this whole process. Next slide. The ability for the Community Infrastructure Center to get communities in a state of matchmaking is I think a really pivotal step here. A lot of folks, a lot of cities, a lot of community-based organizations that we work with that come to this platform don't have the capacity to know what's coming down from DOE or Department of Labor or so, having that vital kind of conduit here, I think can kind of shrink that process of alignment. Next slide. The readiness assessment, again, is another kind of technical assistance standpoint that we've worked with our partners as HRNA to really help, hand in glove with cities and community-based organizations on project readiness. Next slide. Again, this is what the grant matchmaking portal looks like functionally. Next slide. This is again the portal for content matching and further case studies or project use cases that you might be aligned with. Next slide. Again, here now this is the fun part, the California work. So we've dedicated, because of our partnership with SGC and kind of as an outgrowth of the Climate Catalyst Conference, a whole California dedicated channel. Next slide. And a lot of our sponsors here are also sponsors of the Climate Catalyst Conference, so completely supportive of this work moving forward. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I think I'll just open it up at this point now to kind of the conversation, because I really am cognizant of time. I want to move into that. So would invite additional questions for Matt or comments on the 10,000 Communities Initiative, but also really want to hear from this council around this piece around kind of institutionalizing best practices. As we are going through and finalizing the agenda for the conference, we would like to hear from you. What are the things what does success look like in 10 years? And so how can we ensure some of that effective implementation and institutional of the practices are put into practice? What we'll do with the information and the conversation from today's the information and input from today's conversation is we'll make sure that we're building sessions, speakers, panels in February that then really respond to what we hear from the council. And then that will then help inform and shape the summary papers and SGC's work moving forward. So just wanted to give that context as we go into any questions that you all might have for Matt or any responses that you have to the discussion question that we have put forward to the council. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that overview. And I think for me, the exciting thing is the focus on taking it beyond the conference, and it's already happening from the last one. I think that is in part sort of leading towards institutionalizing it. And then I think the PR part of it is a good approach as well, so that people know about it. That is also not only institutionalizing it in the state government, but most importantly, the people who are actually engaged, in getting the shovel-worthy projects, ready. And how do you, connect the dots there? I think that is great. But I think the big takeaway for me and why I think this conference would be even more so than the last one is really sort of going to the implementation part of it. And then what does that mean so there's many components to it, the resources, the, connecting the dots, people, organizations that need to be connected, and then building this institutional, not only knowledge, but sort of culture change around, these kinds of issues. So I really think you are on the right track. And then the, partnership is incredible. A lot of the supporters, I think it takes a village, to get this, and that I see the village being built, which again, for me is part of how you institutionalize something like this. So no, I'm really excited. I think it's in the right direction. Those are for me sort of the highlights of what I think the value of not only just the conference itself, but the takeaway from that and the follow-up on those. So I'll stop there. Anyone else from my colleagues? Jamie?
I have a question for you. Thank you so much for going through this 10,000 Communities Initiative. So a lot of communities that we work with may not have internet. They are still pen and paper phone call, rural communities that need a lot of this technology. And from your presentation, I saw, maybe it's just the pictures of laptops that got me, but I was wondering, what are your strategies to connect with these communities and build this partnership with them when they may not have access to internet and all that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we're hoping to use the vehicle of the Climate Catalyst Conference to further engage and to power the state as a convener to help access some of these cities. I'm in California. I have a Prius, but that's to the point of our ability to go to be there, to be able to identify where we need to be and, sit and use the data infrastructure itself and input. That's part of this process as well, is kind of an engagement kind of scenario when needed.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Great. Sure.
I promise not to be long-winded. Thank you. It's the end of the meeting. I'm just going to start dropping stuff on the table now. Thank you for all the thought and intention that you're putting in to reflect on last year's conference and how we build from that. And so I really like the title of the conference, just to start there. Really excited to see the portal in action as well, but agree that access needs to be at the center of how we're doing this. And so I think one thing that the council can consider in the future is how we get the word out to all of our departments, even if they're not participating in the Catalyst conference, but to kind of amplify what this could mean, because even rural communities are benefiting from state or federal pass-through dollars where we're working directly with communities. And so how can we continue to share this message that there may be more, while respecting the layer cake that we're talking about earlier in the last session. But, so I think we can all, as council members, kind of think about ways that we can do that. And through that communication, I think we start to get at how we're institutionalizing some of this, because if we're just talking about the infrastructure strike team and things that are happening in one-time conferences, how do we get into the departments who may not have the benefit of engaging in this program or thinking about how their program can be leveraged? Like, we have to get there as well. And I think especially with changes in administration, one that is definitely coming at the end of the governor's term, we need to think about how to make some of these connections enduring. And so hopefully the conference isn't the only time that we think about that, but do some reflection as a team here. Just to riff off of what I said earlier, that housing isn't directly named, but can be part of the solution here. I think the extent to which we center that in some of the discussion seems really important. It's going to be challenging if we do big economic and workforce development investments that don't have homes for people near those investments. And then future us's are going to be saying, we're not getting the GHG reductions that we would have hoped for because people are driving even with battery powered cars, right? Like, we have to do better. And so how do we think about kind of fomenting community visions through what we know the funding can achieve? And so I'd like to ask that we keep pulling our federal partners in with us to make it easier, just as we heard from the last panel, that we need clarity on this. And, thank goodness for the folks who are working to make it easier for people to access this, but like, we have to make that kind of work lasting. Yeah, and weave it together. Thank you for the sign. So I think that's about it. Oh, no. Last thing, to the Justice 40 components, this ties to some of our state's work in the state law on affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is not just about housing, but how we think about all community investments. And that's providing access to communities of opportunity, and creating more inclusivity in those communities. And then also making sure that we're investing in communities that have been in need for community investments and have been locked out of those opportunities. And so I see a direct nexus there. And I know we've named FFH in Council Priority 3. So maybe there's an opportunity to reflect on how to weave that in to the Catalyst Conference as a way to start talking about making these lasting changes. That was way longer than I expected to go, but there we go.
And maybe if I can quickly reflect on the question on kind of recommendations to agencies and departments. One of the things that we are experimenting with is asking for Community Resiliency Center applicants to consider also putting the projects that they're submitting to us through our program into the 10,000 Communities portal. And so the idea being that our programs, like many that I'm sure you all are administering, are oversubscribed. But so much effort and work goes into creating these projects that I think that this portal gives us a place where it's almost like a secondary place where projects can continue to be evaluated, matched with different types of funding, and have that assistance that's looking beyond just one funding source. And so I think that's one real interesting potential on how this could look for kind of departments who are experiencing oversubscription. Because I think that what this does is it helps with that breaking down the silos, where one project that knows about SGC funding might not know about FEMA BRIC funding, but that funds a very similar type of effort. And so having that place, those connection points so that projects, because we know so much effort goes into creating these, can then identify different funding sources that might keep a project idea alive and viable and get that support to get to another funding stream.
Great. Anyone else? Yeah. Cool.
So it sounds fabulous, this 10,000 communities. What is it?
The infrastructure center.
Oh, infrastructure. Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to think of from a CBO perspective, and like what we're already grappling with. I think, yes, lack of knowledge about all the possible grant opportunities is like an obvious hurdle. But the idea, I like Lynn's idea that there's like this, the portal is at, for folks who have applied and didn't receive grant funding, this is like a second chance. But, and sorry if you said this, but so then what happens though, when you put your project in? Do you assign to somebody or like, does the portal itself spit back ideas or?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So, from a project input standpoint, it kind of gets you to a sense of like where you're at in that continuum of
Okay.
pre-development.
Okay.
If you're at a point of matchmaking, it identifies
Okay.
what funding might align with what your intended goals are there. But then it also gets you to a sense of what other kind of feasibility studies or other types of pre-development work before you're in a, put our shovels in the ground kind of engagement point. So like up into that jumping off point, it kind of puts us into an arc of project readiness.
And how would you know where we're at on the project?
Well, certain grants have certain
Just by virtue of.
by what the exactly.
Okay.
So if you're not at a project implementation phase, you might be in an earlier phase of needing more money for pre-development,
Yeah.
or I'm sorry, for feasibility and the types of like entitlement regulatory kind of capacity building exercises before you're actually in implementation phase.
So your entity, your organization would actually know the criteria that was involved in all these different grants?
Well, the grants kind of tell that for us. They lay that out for you in terms of what the grant is trying to do. If
Okay.
you have a project
Seems like a
that's,
lot of
what's that? It is.
work. Okay, yeah, I mean, incredibly important, but that'd be amazing if we just put in our project proposal. I mean, that we submitted as part of a grant and then you
Well,
tell us where we're.
like, let's say we're working with a streetcar project or something, let's just use that as as an example. Or even like a water reclamation project. And it's only at conceptual phases, but you want to get this grant that's only about implementation, then you're going to have to do more of the feasibility
Right.
and the early project engineering before you can be in a project implementation phase.
Cool.
If I can just add a little bit to one of the questions earlier, I think would be awesome to see is as we move through the conference planning, we also have the Connected Communities effort that SGC is launching. And so we have a consultant online that Lynn mentioned earlier in the executive report that's already starting to strategize some of the efforts that we're kind of hearing on how do we plug in the applicants that are coming in for the 10,000 communities to go after the federal funds now. So really kind of thinking about the projects that are already in the planning phase, that are in PD, or the projects that have gone through implementation that are going to be expanding. So kind of bridging some of the work that is taking place for the development of the conference in February, but starting that strategic planning now through those additional funds to catalyze those funding sources. So really thinking about in the springtime, how do we have those toolkits ready? How do we have the playbooks ready to actually continue to move forth as the dollars keep rolling in from the federal government?
Great, thank you all. This is very informative and look forward to the conference. With that, Matt, do we have any public comments?
We have no public comments on this item.
Now this part of the agenda is to take public comments for matters that are not on the agenda. Unfortunately, this is not a forum for dialogue with the council members. Questions posed by the public during this item cannot be substantively addressed or discussed at this meeting. Any required follow-up can be directed to SGC Executive Director Lynn Branco-Libert for follow-up answers and connections to relevant staff. Do we have any?
We have no public comment on matters not on the agenda.
Great, so we will be exactly on time at 4. So as I close, we opened with an acknowledgement of the passing of Cindy Montañez, and I thought it would be appropriate to adjourn this meeting in her memory as well. So Cindy Montañez was a dedicated public leader, serving as a member of the State Assembly, a member of the San Fernando City Council, and Mayor of San Fernando. Throughout her various roles, she remained a steadfast champion for equitable approaches across public health, conservation, and climate resilience that put communities first. She wrote bills for consumer and worker protection, advocated for state funding to replace asphalt with trees and gardens in schools, and shared a multi-benefit approach to community climate resilience internationally. Cindy's lifelong vision for the Los Angeles region is realized in part by three people's partnership with multiple transformative climate community implementation grants in the region. Her leadership in multi-benefit approaches to climate equity and resilience serves as an example for the Strategic Growth Council and our member agencies as we continue to push the needle forward. Her legacy truly does live on her impact. With that, in honor of Cindy Montañez, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for